Welcome to NightSleepWhisper, your safe harbor. Tonight, we weigh anchor and set sail toward the calm waters of sleep. Before we begin the 50-chapter saga of the Silver Anchor, please find your most comfortable position. Close your eyes and listen only to the whisper of the waves. A new world awaits on the horizon. Sleep well, Captain. The sun was very hot in the harbor of Port Royal. Captain Elias walked slowly down a narrow street. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a thick black beard. He wore a long, heavy coat. The coat was old, but it looked strong. Elias liked old things because they had stories. He passed many people on the street. Sailors were carrying heavy boxes. Men were selling fresh fish. The air smelled like the ocean and cooked meat. Elias did not stop to talk to anyone. He was looking for something special. He wanted to find a new adventure. His ship was empty, and his pockets were nearly empty too. He saw a small, dark shop at the end of the street. Above the door, there was a wooden sign. The sign was old and the paint was falling off. It said, "The Sailor's Treasure." Elias pushed the door open. The wood made a long, low sound as it moved against the floor. Inside, the shop was very dark and full of dust. The air felt heavy and smelled like old paper. There were many strange things on the wooden shelves. Elias saw old clocks, rusty swords, and broken lamps. He walked to the back of the room. An old man sat behind a large desk. The man had white hair and wore small glasses. He did not look up when Elias entered. He was busy writing in a big book. "Can I help you, Captain?" the old man asked. His voice was very quiet and thin. "I am just looking," Elias replied. He walked around the room. He looked at a pile of boxes in the corner. One box was different from the others. It was made of dark wood and had metal edges. It was covered in thick, gray spider webs. Elias walked to the box and touched it. The wood felt cold and rough. He opened the lid. The box was almost empty. He found some old, yellow clothes and a broken compass. But then, he saw something bright at the bottom. He reached into the box and pulled out a small object. It was a key. It was not a normal iron key. It was made of bright, shiny silver. The key was heavy and felt very cold in his hand. There were strange marks on the handle. Elias looked at the marks closely. They looked like waves and stars. He had never seen a key like this before. Where did this come from? Elias asked the shopkeeper. The old man finally looked up. He looked at the silver key and then at Elias. His eyes were wide and surprised. "I do not know," the man said. "A traveler left that box here many years ago. He never came back for it. I forgot it was there." Elias felt a spark of excitement. He knew this key was not for a simple door. It was a key for a secret. He put some gold coins on the desk. "I want to buy this," Elias said. The old man took the coins quickly. "Take it, Captain. But be careful. Some secrets are dangerous. That key looks like it belongs to the deep sea." Elias put the silver key in his pocket. He felt its weight against his leg. He walked out of the shop and back into the bright sunlight. The harbor was loud and busy, but Elias did not notice the noise. He was thinking about the silver key. He needed to find his friend Sarah. She was very smart and knew many secrets about the sea. Together, they would find out what this key opened. Elias walked away from the dusty shop. He went to a quiet part of the harbor. He was looking for a small building called the Blue Dolphin. It was a place where sailors went to rest. It was not as loud as the other taverns. Elias pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped inside. The room was warm. A fire burned in a large stone fireplace. The smell of roasted wood and old tobacco filled the air. In a corner, away from the windows, a woman sat alone. She had a large map spread out on a wooden table. She was looking at it very closely. This was Sarah. She was a navigator and a very skilled sailor. She had spent many years on the ocean. Elias walked to her table and sat down. Sarah did not look up immediately. She was drawing a line on her map with a small pencil. Her hands were brown from the sun, and her eyes were sharp and blue. She was a serious person who did not like to waste time. "You look like you found something interesting, Elias," Sarah said. She finally looked at him. She saw the look in his eyes. It was a look of excitement. "I did," Elias replied. He looked around the room to make sure no one was watching. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver key. He placed it on the table, right in the middle of her map. The silver key looked very bright under the orange light of the candles. Sarah stopped moving. She dropped her pencil. She picked up the key and held it near a candle. She looked at the strange marks on the handle. Her face became very serious. "Where did you get this?" she asked in a low voice. "I found it in a box at the sailor's treasure," Elias said. "The shopkeeper said a traveler left it there many years ago. Do you know what it is?" Sarah touched the marks on the key with her finger. "These are not just decorations, Elias. These are ancient symbols. My father told me stories about them. They belong to the legend of the silver anchor." Elias leaned forward. He had heard that name before, but only in songs. The silver anchor. "I thought that was just a story for old sailors." "Many people think that," Sarah said. "The story says there was a king who lived on a hidden island. He had a great treasure. He locked it away with 2 keys. One was made of silver, and one was made of gold. People searched for these keys for 100 years, but they found nothing." Elias looked at the key. "And now we have the first one." Sarah nodded. "This key is very important. But we cannot stay here. If people see this key, they will try to take it. We need a ship, and we need a crew we can trust. This is not a simple fishing trip, Elias. This is a journey into the unknown." Elias smiled. This was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to feel the wind in his hair and see new lands. He was tired of sitting in the harbor. "I am ready," Elias said. "We need a ship that is fast and strong. Do you know where we can find one?" Sarah looked at her map again. "I know a ship. It is old, but it is built of iron and oak. It is called the Iron Whale. If we can get that ship, we can leave this port before the sun comes up." Elias stood up. He felt strong and full of energy. "Then let us go. Our adventure starts tonight." The moon was high in the sky when Elias and Sarah reached the far end of the harbor. This part of the port was very quiet. The water was dark and moved slowly against the wooden piers. Sarah led the way past large stacks of ropes and empty barrels. She stopped in front of a very large ship. The ship did not look like the other boats in the harbor. It was very wide and sat deep in the water. Its wood was dark, almost black, and there were plates of iron bolted to the sides. It looked more like a giant fish than a sailing vessel. "There she is," Sarah said. She pointed to the name painted on the side in fading white letters, the Iron Whale. Elias walked closer. He looked at the tall masts. They were thick and strong. He touched the side of the ship. The wood felt solid, like a stone wall. It was a ship built for long journeys and dangerous weather. It was not pretty, but it was powerful. "It is a strange name for a ship," Elias remarked. He looked at the iron plates. "But I like it. It looks like it can survive a fight." It was built for the cold northern seas. Sarah explained. The iron protects the wood from the ice and the rocks. It is slow, but it never breaks. We need a ship that stays together when the ocean gets angry. They walked up a narrow wooden plank to the deck. The ship was very quiet. There was no one on board. The deck was wide and clean. Elias walked to the back of the ship where the large wooden wheel stood. He put his hands on the wheel. It was cold and heavy. He turned it slightly. It moved smoothly. The rudder is in good condition, Elias said. He felt a sense of pride. This was going to be his ship. Sarah went below the deck to check the middle of the ship. She carried a small lamp. The light showed many empty rooms. There was a lot of space for food, water, and perhaps a great treasure. She looked at the floor and the ceiling. There were no holes. The ship was dry. The hull is perfect. Sarah called out from below. We just need to clean the sails and buy fresh supplies. We also need a lot of wood for the kitchen and plenty of fresh water. Elias looked out at the dark ocean. He could see the waves moving in the moonlight. He felt the silver key in his pocket. He knew they were doing the right thing. We do not have much time, Elias said when Sarah came back up. Captain Morgan is a dangerous man. If he hears about the key, he will come to this harbor. We must get the ship ready in 2 days. Sarah nodded. Her face was very serious. I will start a list of the things we need. You must find the sailors. We need men who are not afraid of a long journey. We need men who can fight and men who can fix the sails in a storm. Elias looked at the iron whale one more time. It was an old ship, but it was a good ship. It was the beginning of their new life. I will go to the taverns tomorrow morning, Elias said. I will find the best crew in Port Royal. The next morning, the sun was bright. Elias went to a tavern near the water. The name of the tavern was the Salty Anchor. It was a loud and busy place. Many sailors sat at long wooden tables. They were drinking coffee and eating bread. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and the salty sea. Elias walked to the middle of the room. He stood on a small chair so everyone could see him. He looked at the faces in the room. Most of the men and women were strong. Their skin was dark from the sun. Their hands were rough from pulling ropes. These were the people he needed. Listen to me, Elias shouted. His voice was loud and clear. The room became quiet. Many sailors turned to look at him. My name is Captain Elias. I have a ship called the Iron Whale. I am looking for a crew. We are going on a long journey into the deep ocean. A tall man with grey hair stood up. He had a long scar on his arm. His name was Silas. He was an old friend of Elias. Silas was a very good sailor. He knew how to fix sails and how to fight. Where are we going, Elias? Silas asked. He looked at the other sailors. The ocean is a big place. Is there gold? Is there danger? Elias looked Silas in the eye. There is a lot of danger. There will be storms and perhaps enemies. But if we find what we are looking for, every person on the ship will be rich. We will share the treasure equally. The sailors began to talk to each other. Some looked afraid, but many looked interested. A woman named Martha stood up next. She was a great lookout. She could see a bird in the sky from a mile away. I am tired of sitting in this harbor, Martha said. The Iron Whale is a strong ship. I want to see the world again. I am with you, Captain. Silas nodded his head. If Martha is going, I am going too. I will help you lead the crew, Elias. One by one, more sailors stood up. Elias chose 20 people. He picked the strongest and the smartest. He did not want people who were lazy. He needed sailors who could work during the night and stay calm during a storm. He wrote their names on a piece of paper. "Meet me at the Iron Whale at sunset." Elias told them, "Bring your boots and your coats. We leave soon." The sailors went back to their food, but they were excited now. They talked about the journey. Elias felt happy. He had a ship, he had a map, and now he had a crew. He walked out of the tavern and back into the fresh air. He saw Sarah waiting for him by the water. She was watching the British Navy ships in the middle of the harbor. She looked worried. "Did you find them?" she asked. "Yes." Elias said, "We have a crew. Silas and Martha are coming with us. They are the best sailors in Port Royal." "That is good," Sarah said. She pointed to a large Navy ship with many guns. "Because the Navy is watching the harbor. We must be very quiet when we leave." The sun was setting, and the sky was a deep orange color. Elias and Sarah walked away from the harbor. They moved through the narrow, twisting streets of the old city. The buildings here were very close together. It was hard to see the sky. Sarah stopped in front of a small, stone house. The windows were small and dark. "An old man lives here," Sarah whispered. "His name is Mr. Thorne. He was a great sailor many years ago. Now, he makes the best maps in the world. He knows the secrets of the sea better than anyone." Elias knocked on the heavy wooden door. After a long minute, the door opened. A very thin man stood there. He had a long, white beard and very bright eyes. He wore a blue robe that was too big for him. He looked at Elias and Sarah for a long time. "I do not sell maps today," the old man said. His voice was like the sound of dry leaves on the ground. "We do not want a normal map, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said. She stepped into the light of the doorway. "We found something. We think it belongs to a legend." Mr. Thorne looked at Sarah. He remembered her father. He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come inside. It is cold in the street." The house was full of maps. They were on the walls, on the tables, and in big piles on the floor. There were also old instruments for looking at the stars. Elias took the silver key out of his pocket. He placed it on a table under a bright lamp. Mr. Thorne moved closer to the table. He did not touch the key at first. He put on a second pair of glasses and looked at the marks on the silver handle. He breathed slowly. His hands began to shake a little bit. "The silver key," he whispered. "I thought it was lost in the great storm 50 years ago. Where did you find this?" "In a dusty shop near the water," Elias replied. "Can you tell us where it goes?" "We have a ship, and we have a crew. We want to find the silver anchor." Mr. Thorne did not speak. He walked to a large wooden chest in the corner of the room. He used a small iron key to open it. He pulled out a long tube made of leather. Inside the tube was a very old map. The paper was brown and very thin. He spread it out on the table next to the silver key. The map showed a part of the ocean that was not on normal maps. There were drawings of sea monsters and giant rocks. In the middle of the ocean, there was a small island. Next to the island, there was a symbol. It was the same symbol that was on the silver key, a wave and a star. "This is the map of mirrors," Mr. Thorne said. "It shows the path to the hidden island. But the path is not easy. You must follow the stars at night and the sun during the day. If you make one mistake, you will be lost forever." He looked at Elias with a serious face. "Many men died looking for this. Captain Morgan is also looking for this map. He is a cruel man. Do not let him see it." Elias took the map carefully. He felt the old paper in his hands. It felt like he was holding a great secret. "We will be careful, Mr. Thorne. Thank you. Go now," the old man said. "The wind is changing. It is time for you to sail." Elias and Sarah walked back into the night. They had the key and they had the map. But as they walked, Elias felt someone watching them from the shadows of a dark alley. The moon was big and white in the night sky. Elias and Sarah walked quickly toward the far end of the harbor. They did not talk. They did not want anyone to hear them. The old map was safe inside Elias's coat, and the silver key was heavy in his pocket. They finally reached the pier where the iron whale was waiting. Silas and Martha were already there. The 20 sailors were standing on the deck in the shadows. They were very quiet, waiting for their captain. The ship looked like a dark mountain in the water. The iron plates on the sides of the ship reflected the soft light of the moon. "Is everyone ready?" Elias asked in a low voice. "Yes, Captain," Silas whispered. "The food is in the kitchen. The water is in the barrels. The crew is ready to sail. The British Navy is close," Sarah said. She pointed to a large ship with many yellow lights. It was not far away. "They are watching the harbor entrance. We must be very quiet. If they see us, they will stop us." Elias looked at the sails. They were folded neatly on the masts. He looked at the heavy iron anchor. He needed to move the ship without making a loud noise. He gave a signal with his hand. The sailors began to work like shadows. They untied the thick ropes from the wooden pier. They moved carefully so their boots did not make a sound on the wood. Suddenly, Elias saw lights moving on the shore. He saw men with torches running toward the pier. The fire from the torches looked like small orange stars in the dark. "Captain Morgan's men," Martha said. She had the sharp eyes of a bird. "They found us." "Quickly," Elias commanded, but he kept his voice low. "Push the ship away from the pier." For strong sailors used long wooden poles to push the iron whale into the water. The ship moved slowly at first. The water made a soft splashing sound against the metal hull. The men on the shore reached the edge of the pier. They shouted with anger, but the ship was already moving away into the dark water. One man fired a gun. The bullet hit the iron side of the ship. "Raise the sails," Elias shouted. Silas and the other sailors pulled the ropes with all their strength. The large sails fell down and caught the night wind. The ship began to move much faster. The wind was strong and cool against Elias's face. The iron whale started to cut through the waves. The Navy ship saw the movement. The sailors on the Navy ship started to light more lamps and blow whistles. They were getting ready to follow. But Elias knew his ship. The iron whale was already near the harbor exit. Elias stood at the big wooden wheel. He turned it hard to the right. The ship turned toward the open ocean. "We are clear," Sarah said. She looked back at the city lights. The lights were getting smaller and smaller. The harbor was behind them now. The deep, dark blue of the ocean was in front of them. The ship was free. Elias felt a great weight lift from his chest. They were finally on their way to find the treasure. "Keep the sails full," Elias told the crew. "We do not stop until the sun comes up." The sun rose slowly over the edge of the world. The sky turned from a deep blue to a bright, golden yellow. Captain Elias stood at the back of the ship. He looked at the water behind them. There was no land to see. Port Royal was gone. The only things in the world were the iron whale and the big, empty ocean. Elias felt the cool wind on his face. It was a good wind. It pushed the ship forward at a steady speed. He looked down at the main deck. The sailors were busy. Silas was showing a sailor how to tie a complex knot in a heavy rope. Martha was high up on the mast in the crow's nest, looking at the horizon for other ships. "How is the crew doing, Silas?" Elias asked. He walked down the wooden stairs to the deck. Silas wiped his forehead with his hand. "They are working hard, Captain. Some of them are not used to a ship this heavy. The iron whale moves differently than a light fishing boat. But they are learning. They are strong and they do not complain." "Good," Elias said. "We need everyone to be ready. This ocean can change its mood very quickly." Near the middle of the ship, Sarah sat at a small wooden table. She had the map of mirrors open. She held a brass compass in her hand. She looked at the position of the sun and then looked back at her map. She was very quiet and focused. "Are we on the right path?" Elias asked her. Sarah looked up and smiled. "Yes. Mr. Thorne's map is very accurate. The map says we must follow the morning sun for 3 days. Then, we must look for a group of 3 small rocks in the water. We are exactly where we need to be." Elias looked at the sailors. Some were cleaning the wooden floor with salt water and brushes. Others were checking the food barrels in the storage area. Everyone had a job. On a ship, if one person does not do their job, everyone is in danger. These adults knew the rules of the sea. They worked together without many words. The air smelled fresh and clean. There was no smell of smoke or dirty city streets here. There was only the smell of salt and wet wood. The ship made a low, rhythmic sound as it moved through the waves. It felt like a giant heart beating under their feet. It was a steady and comforting sound. "Captain!" Martha shouted from the top of the mast. She pointed to the side of the ship. "I see a group of dolphins." The sailors stopped for a moment and looked at the water. A group of grey dolphins jumped high out of the blue waves. They were fast and graceful. They swam next to the ship for a few minutes. The sailors cheered. It was a sign of good luck on the ocean. Elias felt a sense of peace. He looked at his crew. They were not just workers now. They were becoming a team. They had a long way to go, but they were starting well. He reached into his pocket and touched the silver key. It was still cold. The adventure was truly beginning. The afternoon began with a soft wind, but by the middle of the day, the air turned very cold. Elias stood on the deck and looked at the horizon. The bright blue sky was disappearing. In its place, giant black clouds moved across the water. They were tall and looked like dark mountains of smoke. "Silas, look at the sky!" Elias shouted. Silas looked up and squinted his eyes. His face became very serious. He knew the ocean well. This was not a small rain. This was a great storm. "Everyone, get to your places!" Silas yelled to the sailors. "Lower the mainsails. Tie the ropes tight. We must prepare the ship now." The sailors moved quickly. They climbed the tall masts to pull the heavy cloth of the sails. The wind started to blow very hard. It pulled at their clothes and made it difficult to stand on the wooden deck. The ocean changed color. It was no longer a beautiful blue. It was now a dark, angry gray. Sarah came up from the cabin. She held onto a wooden rail as the ship began to tilt to the side. "The map says these waters are famous for storms," she said. Her hair was flying in the wind. "The magnetic rocks nearby make the clouds very heavy and dark." "Go below, Sarah. It is safer there," Elias said. "No, I will stay here," she replied. She grabbed a thick rope and helped a sailor pull it. Suddenly, the first drop of rain fell. Then, 1,000 more drops followed. It was a wall of water. The rain was so thick that Elias could not see the front of the ship. A bright light split the dark sky. A few seconds later, a very loud, deep noise rolled across the ocean. It was so powerful that the wooden deck shook under Elias's boots. A giant wave, as tall as a house, rose up from the sea. It hit the side of the iron whale with a massive force. The ship leaned far to the left. Water poured over the side and covered the deck. Sailors held onto ropes and wooden poles to stay on the ship. "Hold on!" Elias screamed over the wind. He ran to the big wooden wheel. He grabbed it with both hands. The wheel tried to spin out of his control. The water was trying to push the ship over. Elias pushed back with all his strength. His muscles hurt, and his hands were red, but he did not let go. The wind made a high, whistling noise as it passed through the ropes. The ocean was white with foam. It was a battle between the men and the sea. Elias looked at his crew through the heavy rain. They were wet and cold, and the water was up to their knees. But they were not running away. They were brave. They were fighting for their lives. "We can survive this," Elias thought. "The iron whale is strong. We just have to wait for the light." The storm finally ended in the early morning. The dark clouds moved away to the east, and the sun came up. It was a pale, yellow sun, but its light was very welcome. The ocean was still moving with large, slow waves, but the wind was quiet now. Captain Elias stood on the wet deck. He was very tired. He had stayed at the wheel all night. He looked around the ship. The iron whale was a mess. There was seaweed on the wooden floor and broken ropes everywhere. But the biggest problem was above his head. Elias looked up and saw the main mast. The thick wooden pole was not straight. It had a large crack in the middle. It looked like it could break at any moment. "Silas! Sarah! Come here!" Elias called out. Silas came up from the lower deck. He looked very tired, and his shirt was torn. Sarah followed him. She had a small cut on her hand, but she looked brave. They both looked up at the damaged mast. "It is bad, Captain," Silas said. He touched the wood near the crack. The wind was too strong. "If we do not fix this now, the mast will fall into the sea. Then we will be stuck in the middle of the ocean." "We have extra wood in the storage room," Sarah said. "We also have plenty of thick rope. We can make it strong again." Elias nodded. "Tell the crew to start working. We cannot wait. We need to be ready to move before the sun sets." The sailors began to work immediately. They were adults with many years of experience, and they knew what to do. 2 strong men went below and brought up a long, heavy piece of oak wood. Other sailors gathered hammers, nails, and long coils of rope. Silas led the work. He climbed halfway up the mast with a saw. The sound of the metal teeth cutting the wood was loud in the quiet morning. He cut away the broken pieces of the mast. Then, the sailors used a system of ropes and pulleys to lift the new piece of oak. They placed it against the crack. It was difficult work. The ship moved up and down on the waves, making it hard to stay balanced. Elias helped the men pull the heavy ropes. His hands were sore, but he did not stop. They pushed the new wood into place and began to tie it. They wrapped the rope around the mast hundreds of times. They pulled it so tight that the wood groaned. Sarah worked with the other sailors to clean the deck. She checked the food barrels. "Some of our water is gone," she told Elias. 2 barrels broke during the storm. "We must be careful with what we drink. We will find water at the next island," Elias replied. He looked up. The mast was finally straight. It looked different with the new wood and the thick ropes, but it was solid. By the late afternoon, the repairs were finished. The sailors were exhausted and sat on the deck to rest. Elias felt a great sense of relief. They had survived the storm, and they had fixed their ship. They were a good team. "Raise the small sail," Elias commanded. "We must continue our journey." Martha shouted from high above. "Land! I see land to the west." Elias climbed a few steps up the rigging to see for himself. On the horizon, a long, green shape appeared through the sea mist. It was the island of Tortuga. Every sailor in the Caribbean knew this place. It was a home for people who loved the sea and a hiding place for those who did not want to be found. "Take us in, Silas," Elias commanded. "But stay alert. Tortuga is full of friends, but it is also full of thieves." As the iron whale moved closer, the island grew larger. High green mountains rose from the blue water. Thick forests covered the hills. At the bottom of the mountains, there was a busy town with white stone buildings and wooden docks. There were hundreds of ships in the harbor. Some were small fishing boats, and others were large pirate ships with many black guns. The air smelled different here. It did not just smell like salt anymore. It smelled like smoke, spicy food, and old wood. The sound of people shouting and music playing came across the water. It was a loud and lively place. The ship moved slowly into the crowded harbor. Elias steered carefully between the other vessels. They found a small space near the end of a long wooden pier. The sailors threw heavy ropes to the men on the shore. With a soft nudge, the ship stopped against the wood. "Silas, stay with the ship," Elias said as he put on his heavy coat. "Keep the crew on the deck. I do not want anyone to wander off and get into trouble. Sarah and I will go into the town to find water and wood." Elias and Sarah walked down the wooden plank onto the land. The ground felt strange under their boots. After many days at sea, the earth felt too still. The streets were narrow and crowded with adults. There were sailors from many different countries. Some wore bright silks, and others wore rags. They saw men trading gold coins for barrels of wine and women carrying baskets of tropical fruit. They walked to a large market in the center of the town. "We need 4 barrels of fresh water and a large pile of dry oak," Elias told a man at a stall. He handed over a few silver coins. "And we need them delivered to the Iron Whale before sunset." As they waited, Sarah looked around nervously. She pulled her hat lower over her eyes. "Elias, look over there," she whispered. She pointed toward a large, expensive ship at the far end of the harbor. It had a flag with a red serpent on it. Elias felt a cold shiver. "That is the Serpent. It is Captain Morgan's ship. He is already here," Sarah said. Her voice was full of worry. "He must be looking for us. We cannot stay here long." Elias nodded. He gripped the silver key inside his pocket. "We get our supplies and we leave. We do not want a fight in this harbor. We must be faster than him." They walked quickly back toward their ship. The shadows were getting longer, and the city was becoming even louder. The adventure was getting more dangerous with every hour. The morning was very quiet. The Iron Whale had escaped from Tortuga in the middle of the night. They did not want Captain Morgan to follow them. For 3 days, they sailed through a thick, grey mist. The air was damp and cold. The sailors could not see the sun or the stars. They had to trust Sarah and her compass. "The mist is very thick today," Silas said. He was standing near the front of the ship. He wiped the water from his face. "I cannot see the waves in front of us." Elias nodded. He held the wooden wheel firmly. "Keep a sharp eye, Silas. We do not want to hit any hidden rocks. This mist hides many secrets." Sarah was looking at the map of mirrors. She held a small lantern close to the old paper. According to the map, we are very close. The water is moving us toward the south. We must stay on this path and wait for the light. Suddenly, the wind changed. It began to blow from the east. It was a warm, sweet wind. It smelled like flowers and tropical fruit. The grey mist started to move. It broke into small pieces and floated away like smoke. The sun broke through the clouds, and the world became bright and warm again. "Look!" Martha shouted from the crow's nest. Her voice was full of surprise. "Look at the horizon." Elias and Sarah ran to the side of the ship. In the distance, a magnificent island rose from the blue sea. It was unlike any island Elias had ever seen. The beaches were made of sand that looked like pure, polished gold. The sun reflected off the shore, making it sparkle and shine. "The golden shore," Sarah whispered. She looked at the map and then at the land. "It is real." The stories from the old books were true. The water around the island was very clear and very still. Elias could see the white sand and colorful fish deep under the waves. Green palm trees stood tall along the beach. Their long leaves moved slowly in the warm breeze. There were no dark clouds here. The sky was a perfect, clear blue. "It is beautiful," Silas said. He looked at the crew. The sailors were all standing at the rail. They were smiling and pointing at the land. They had been at sea for a long time. The sight of the golden sand made them feel happy and full of hope. "Do not forget our mission," Elias told his crew. His voice was serious. "Beautiful places can have many hidden dangers. We do not know what is waiting for us in those trees. Stay ready." He looked at Sarah. She was already checking the depth of the water with a long rope. "We must find a place to drop the anchor," she said. "The water is getting shallow very quickly." Elias turned the wheel slowly. He steered the iron whale toward a small, quiet bay. The ship moved gracefully through the calm water. The golden sand was getting closer and closer. The sailors began to prepare the small boats. They were ready to touch the land. "Prepare the anchor," Elias commanded. "We go to the shore at noon." The golden sand of the beach was beautiful, but it was too open. Elias knew that if Captain Morgan arrived, he would see the iron whale immediately. They needed a place to hide the ship. He looked at the coast of the island. To the north, the bright sand ended, and the land changed. Large, dark rocks rose high into the sky. They looked like giant stone teeth biting the blue water. "There," Elias said. He pointed toward the tall rocks. "The map shows a small opening in those stones. If we can find it, we can hide the ship from the open sea." Sarah looked through a long brass telescope. She scanned the wall of black stone. "I see it, Elias. There is a narrow gap between two high cliffs. It looks very tight. Do you think the ship can fit?" "The iron whale is wide, but she is strong," Elias replied. "We must try. Silas, tell the men to be ready with the long poles. We might need to push the ship away from the rocks." The ship moved slowly along the coast. The water here was deeper and a dark, cold green. The high cliffs blocked the sun, and a large shadow fell over the deck. The air became cooler. The sailors stood at the edges of the ship. They held long wooden poles in their hands. Their faces were serious. They knew that one mistake could break the wooden hull of the ship. As they got closer, the gap in the rocks looked even smaller. The stone walls were wet and covered in green moss. High above, white birds flew in circles. Elias held the wooden wheel with both hands. He watched the movement of the water. He needed to use the tide to push the ship through the opening. "Steady now," Elias whispered to himself. The ship entered the narrow passage. On both sides, the dark rocks were only a few feet away. The wooden sides of the ship made a low, rubbing noise against the stone. A sailor used his pole to push a large rock away from the front of the boat. The water moved fast in the narrow space. Suddenly, the ship moved past the last of the high rocks. The view opened up. In front of them was a perfect, round bay. The water inside the bay was as flat as a mirror. It was a beautiful, emerald green color. High hills covered in thick trees surrounded the water. It was a secret world, hidden from the rest of the ocean. "We made it," Sarah said. She breathed a sigh of relief. "No one can see us here." "Drop the anchor," Elias commanded. Two strong sailors turned a large iron handle. A heavy chain moved quickly. The large iron anchor hit the water and sank to the bottom. The ship stopped moving and sat quietly in the middle of the bay. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees on the hills. "This is the perfect place," Silas said. He looked at the thick jungle. "Now we just need to find the path to the treasure." Elias looked at the silver key. They were safe for now, but the real challenge was just beginning. They had to leave the safety of the ship and go into the dark forest. The sun was directly above the ship. The air in the hidden bay was very hot and still. There was no wind here. Elias looked at the dark green trees on the shore. They looked very thick and old. He felt a mix of excitement and a little bit of fear. This was the moment they had worked for. He turned to the sailors on the deck. "Silas, Martha, come with us," Elias said. "We also need 2 more strong men. The rest of the crew must stay here. Keep the guns ready. If you see another ship, give us a signal." The sailors moved quickly to the side of the ship. They used thick ropes to lower a small wooden boat into the green water. Elias, Sarah, Silas, and Martha climbed down a rope ladder. They were joined by 2 sailors named Ben and Thomas. All of them were experienced adults who knew how to stay quiet. Elias sat at the back of the small boat. He checked his belt. He had his heavy sword and a small bag of supplies. He reached into his pocket and felt the silver key. It was warm from the sun now. Sarah sat next to him. She held the map of mirrors in a waterproof leather tube. She looked at the shore with very sharp eyes. "The water is very clear here," Sarah whispered. She looked down. "I can see the white sand at the bottom. It is not very deep." Silas and the other men took the heavy wooden oars. They began to row toward the beach. The boat moved slowly but steadily. As they got closer, the smell of the island became very strong. It was the smell of wet earth and strange, sweet flowers. A large, colorful bird flew over their heads. It had bright red and blue feathers. It did not make a sound, but it watched them from a high branch of a palm tree. The beach was very narrow here. The jungle started almost where the water ended. The trees were so close together that it looked like a green wall. The front of the wooden boat hit the soft sand. The sailors jumped out into the warm, shallow water. They pulled the boat higher onto the dry land so the tide would not take it away. Elias stepped onto the beach. His boots sank into the white sand. He looked back at the iron whale. The ship looked very small in the middle of the large bay. "We are here," Elias said. He looked at his small team. They all looked back at him. Their faces were serious. They were far away from their homes and the busy streets of Port Royal. Sarah walked to the edge of the trees. She looked at a small opening in the bushes. "The map says there is a path here. It leads to the center of the island. But it hasn't been used for a very long time." Elias pulled out his sword. The metal was bright and sharp. "I will go first. Silas, you take the back. Keep your eyes on the trees. We do not know what lives on this island." He took his first step into the jungle. The light of the sun became dim under the thick leaves. The adventure on land had finally begun. The jungle was a very different world from the open sea. Under the giant green leaves, the air was heavy and wet. It was hard to breathe. The sun was still bright in the sky, but very little light reached the ground. Everything was a deep, dark green. Elias used his sharp sword to cut through the thick vines that blocked their way. The metal blade moved through the plants with a steady rhythm. "Stay close together," Elias said. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "The ground is soft here. Watch where you step." The sailors walked in a single line. Sarah was right behind Elias. She held the leather tube tightly. Every few minutes, she stopped to look at the ground. She was looking for signs of the old path. Sometimes she found a flat stone hidden under the moss. These stones were part of a road that people built many years ago. "The path is still here," Sarah whispered. "It leads toward the high mountain in the center of the island. We are going in the right direction." The jungle was not quiet. There were many sounds, but they were not like the sounds of the harbor. High in the trees, monkeys moved quickly between the branches. Their long tails helped them jump from tree to tree. Large insects with bright wings flew past the sailors' faces. Martha kept her eyes on the high branches. She was always looking for danger. "The trees are very tall here," she remarked. "I cannot see the sky anymore. It feels like we are inside a giant green room." As they walked deeper into the forest, the ground began to rise. They were starting to climb the side of a hill. The walk became more difficult. Silas and the other men were breathing heavily. Their heavy boots made a soft thumping sound on the wet earth. Suddenly, Elias stopped. He raised his hand, and the group became very still. "What is it, Captain?" Silas asked in a low voice. Elias pointed to a large tree. In front of the tree, there was a stone statue. It was very old and covered in green plants. The statue looked like a man holding a large anchor. The face of the statue was gone, but the anchor was clear. "It is a marker," Elias said. He walked to the statue and pulled away some of the vines. "The people who lived here wanted to show the way. This statue is pointing toward the north." Sarah checked her map. "The map says the stone gate is near a place with many statues. We are very close now." They continued to walk, but they were more careful. They knew they were not the only ones who wanted the treasure. Elias thought about Captain Morgan. Was he already on the island? Was he watching them from the dark shadows of the trees? He gripped his sword more tightly. They had to reach the gate before the sun went down. The trees began to grow further apart as the group climbed higher. The ground was no longer soft dirt. It was now hard, gray rock. The air was a little cooler here, and the sailors could finally see the blue sky above the mountain. Elias stopped at the edge of a large, flat clearing. In front of them, the mountain rose up like a giant wall. "Look at that," Silas whispered. He pointed toward the center of the rock wall. A massive gate stood there. It was made of heavy, dark stones. The gate was so tall that it looked like it belonged to a giant. Large vines with thick thorns grew over the sides of the stone, but the middle of the gate was clear. There were many carvings in the rock. Elias saw pictures of old ships, tall waves, and the same silver anchor symbol they had seen before. "The stone gate," Sarah said. She walked closer and touched the cold surface of the stone. The map was correct. This is the entrance to the heart of the mountain. The sailors looked at the gate with wonder. It looked very old, perhaps hundreds of years old. There were no handles or hinges on the door. It looked like a solid part of the mountain. Sarah searched the surface of the gate with her hands. She moved her fingers over the carvings of the waves and the stars. Near the center of the door, she found a small, round hole. "Elias, come here," she called out. Elias walked to the gate. He saw the hole. It was very small and surrounded by a circle of bright metal. The metal was not rusty or dirty. It was clean and shiny. It was made of silver. He took the silver key out of his pocket. The key matched the metal circle perfectly. "This is it," Elias said. His heart was beating fast. He looked at Silas and Martha. They stood behind him with their hands on their swords. They were watching the trees behind the group. They knew they were close to the secret, but they also knew they were vulnerable. "Wait," Sarah said quietly. "Listen." Elias stayed very still. He did not hear the birds or the monkeys anymore. The jungle was completely quiet. It felt like the island itself was waiting for something to happen. He looked at the silver key in his hand. The marks on the key seemed to glow slightly in the afternoon sun. "Is everyone ready?" Elias asked his team. "Ready, Captain," Ben and Thomas said together. They looked brave, but their eyes were wide. Elias reached out and pushed the silver key into the hole. It fit perfectly. He felt a small click inside the stone. He did not turn the key yet. He looked at the massive stone door. He wondered what was behind it. Was it a room full of gold, or was it a dangerous trap? On 3, Elias commanded. 1, 2, 3. He turned the silver key to the right. A deep, heavy grinding noise came from inside the mountain. The sound of stone moving against stone was very loud. The ground under their boots began to shake. The sailors stepped back as the giant gate started to move slowly into the earth. A dark, cold tunnel appeared behind the heavy stones. The giant stone door was now open. It stayed inside the ground. A dark, cold wind came out of the mountain. It smelled like wet stone and old air. Elias looked into the tunnel. It was very dark. He could not see the end of it. He felt the cold air on his face, and it made him shiver. Martha moved away from the group. She climbed a tall, flat rock near the edge of the cliff. She looked down at the golden beach far below. The sun was still high, and the water was very bright. She put her hand over her eyes to see better. She scanned the horizon and the entrance to the bay. "Captain," she called out. Her voice was low but very sharp. "Look at the bay." Elias and Sarah ran to the edge of the rock. They looked down. The iron whale was sitting quietly in the green water of the hidden bay. But near the entrance of the bay, there was a second ship. It was a large, dark ship with red sails. It looked like a shark in the water. "The serpent," Sarah whispered. Her face went pale. "Captain Morgan found us. He followed the path of the morning sun just like we did." Small wooden boats were moving from the serpent to the shore. Elias saw many men jumping into the shallow water. They were carrying swords and long guns. They looked like small black ants on the golden sand. One man stood in front of the others. He wore a long red coat and a large black hat. Even from this distance, he looked powerful and dangerous. "That is Morgan," Elias said. He felt a cold anger in his heart. He is not wasting any time. He knows we are here. He is not just a pirate. He is a hunter. The men on the beach started to move toward the trees. They were looking at the ground. They were looking for the broken vines and the footprints Elias and his crew had made through the jungle. They were moving quickly. "They are tracking us, Captain," Silas said. He gripped the handle of his sword. "In 1 hour, they will reach this mountain. There are at least 30 of them. We are only 6. The math is not good for us." "We cannot fight them on the open mountain," Elias said. He looked back at the dark tunnel behind the stone gate. "We must go inside. It is our only chance to stay alive and find the treasure." "But what if we get trapped?" Ben asked. He looked at the heavy stone gate. "If they find the silver keyhole, they can follow us right into the dark." "The tunnel is the only way to the treasure," Sarah said. She pulled the map out and checked it one more time. "And the map shows a second exit on the other side of the mountain. If we move fast, we can find the gold and leave before they reach the gate." Elias looked at the beach one last time. Morgan was pointing toward the mountain. He looked like he was shouting orders to his men. The rival captain was a man who never gave up. "Everyone, get inside," Elias commanded. "Martha, bring the torches. Silas, help me find a way to close this gate from the inside. We need to buy ourselves some time." They stepped into the darkness of the mountain. The shadow of their rival was very close now. The race for the silver anchor was truly a race for their lives. The stone gate was heavy and thick. Inside the mountain, the air was very cold. It did not move at all. Elias and Silas looked at the wall next to the door. They found a second silver lever. It was hidden behind a small, flat stone. Elias grabbed the lever and pulled it down with all his strength. The giant stone gate began to rise from the floor. Finally, the gate was completely closed. The group was now in total darkness. "Martha, light the torches," Elias said. Martha took a wooden torch from her leather bag. She used a small piece of flint and a piece of steel to make a spark. Soon, a bright orange flame filled the tunnel. The light danced on the walls. The walls were made of smooth, grey rock. There were many drawings on the stone. Sarah walked to a drawing near the entrance. "This is the history of the keys," Sarah whispered. "The silver key opens the mountain. The golden key opens the heart of the treasure. We have the first part, but we still need the second." The tunnel went deep into the earth. The floor was flat, but it was covered in thick, grey dust. They walked for many minutes in silence. The only sound was the rhythmic thumping of their boots on the stone. Elias looked back at the closed gate one last time. He hoped Captain Morgan did not have another silver key. "We must move fast," Elias said. He led the way with his sword ready. "The air feels very thin here, and we do not know how long the torches will last." The tunnel slowly became wider. After a few more minutes, they reached a large, circular room. In the middle of the room, there was a stone table. On the table, there was an old book. The pages were not made of paper. They were made of thin sheets of metal. Sarah went to the table and held her torch close to the metal book. "This is not a book of stories," she said. "It is a book of maps and warnings. It shows the path through the water trap." Elias felt a cold chill in his bones. A water trap. The paper map from Mr. Thorne did not mention a trap. "The old maps are not always complete," Sarah replied. She turned a heavy metal page. "There is a great river under this mountain. If we take the wrong path, the room will fill with water in seconds. We must be very careful." Silas looked at the dark corners of the large room. He tilted his head to the side. "I hear something," he said quietly. "It is a low, rushing sound." They all became very still and listened. Far away, deep inside the rock, there was a sound like a heavy rain. It was the sound of a river moving fast. The mountain was not just made of stone. It was full of hidden water. Elias held his torch high. He saw 3 different paths at the far end of the room. Each path was dark and narrow. "Which way, Sarah?" Elias asked. He looked at the shadows. Sarah looked at the metal book and then at the 3 paths. She pointed to the path in the center. "The middle one," she said firmly. "But we must move now. The sound of the water is getting louder." Elias, Sarah, and the others stepped into the middle tunnel. The air here was much colder than in the circular room. Martha held the torch high. The orange light jumped across the ceiling and the walls. The ceiling was very low. The tall sailors, like Silas and Ben, had to bend their heads as they walked. The walls were wet, and small drops of water fell from the stone. "Keep the light steady, Martha," Elias said. He touched the wall. The stone felt like ice. "The ground is getting slippery. We do not want anyone to fall." Sarah walked close to the wall. She looked at the carvings in the rock. The torchlight revealed pictures of men and women carrying heavy gold chains. There were also drawings of large, ancient fish with many teeth. These drawings were very old, but they were still very clear. The light from the torch made the eyes of the painted fish look like they were moving. These drawings show the history of the island, Sarah explained. She pointed to a picture of a giant wave hitting a mountain. The people who lived here a long time ago worshipped the ocean. They believed the water was a god. This tunnel was built to honor that god. The sound of the rushing water was much louder now. It was a deep, low roar that filled the tunnel. It felt like the whole mountain was breathing. Elias felt a vibration in the floor under his boots. He knew the river was very close. The tunnel began to turn to the left. Suddenly, the narrow path ended. They stood at the edge of a deep canyon inside the mountain. Martha moved the torch forward. The light showed a narrow bridge made of dark stone. The bridge did not have any rails. It was very thin and looked very dangerous. Far below the bridge, a river of dark, fast water moved through the rocks. The water was white with foam and made a constant, heavy noise. "We have to cross this," Elias said. He looked at the bridge and then at his crew. "One person at a time. Do not look down at the water. Look at the wall on the other side." "I will go first," Silas said. He was a brave man who had climbed the highest masts in the worst storms. He stepped onto the cold stone bridge. He moved slowly. He kept his arms out to stay balanced. The wind from the river below pulled at his clothes. The rest of the group watched him in silence. They did not even breathe. Silas reached the other side and waved his hand. "It is safe. But be very careful. The stone is wet." Elias looked at Sarah. "You go next. I will follow you with the second torch." Sarah took a deep breath. She stepped onto the bridge. The light from Martha's torch was behind her, making a long shadow. She moved 1 foot at a time. The sound of the river was very loud here. It was a powerful, frightening sound. But Sarah stayed calm. She reached Silas, and he grabbed her hand to pull her to safety. One by one, the sailors crossed the dark water. Finally, only Elias was left. He took the torch from Martha and stepped onto the bridge. He felt the cold spray of the water on his face. He looked at the dark tunnel ahead of them. The light showed more carvings and more secrets. They were moving deeper into the heart of the mountain, and the danger was growing. The group moved quickly away from the stone bridge. They entered a new corridor. This part of the mountain felt different. The walls were very smooth and straight. There were no drawings here. The floor was made of large, square stones. Elias held his torch high. He noticed something strange. The stones on the floor had small gaps between them. "Stop," Elias said. He looked at the floor. "Look at the ground. These stones are not like the others." Sarah leaned down to look. "They look like a mechanism," she whispered. "We must be very careful where we step." But it was too late. Behind them, Ben took a step. A loud, heavy sound of metal moving against stone echoed through the tunnel. One of the large floor stones sank into the ground. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then, a deep vibration started in the walls. A loud sound of rushing water filled the air. It was not the river below the bridge anymore. This sound was coming from above them. Suddenly, water began to pour from small holes in the ceiling. The water was very cold. It hit the floor and began to rise quickly. "Run!" Elias shouted. "The tunnel is filling up. We must find the end." They began to run. Their heavy boots made loud splashing sounds in the water. The water was already up to their ankles. It was moving fast, pushing against their legs. Elias led the way, holding the torch as high as he could to keep the fire alive. The light from the torch bounced off the rising water, making the tunnel look like a silver tube. "There is a door at the end," Martha yelled. She was a fast runner and was in the front with Elias. The water was now up to their knees. It was very difficult to move. The force of the water was strong. It tried to pull them back toward the canyon. Silas grabbed Ben's arm to help him stay upright. They were all breathing very hard. The air in the tunnel was becoming misty from the cold spray. "The door is closing," Sarah cried out. At the far end of the corridor, a heavy iron gate was moving down from the ceiling. It was moving slowly, but the tunnel was long. Elias pushed himself to run faster. His muscles burned, but he did not stop. He reached the gate first. He put his hands under the heavy iron bars and tried to hold it up. "Quickly! Get under!" Elias screamed. One by one, the sailors slid under the closing gate. Sarah went first, then Martha and the others. Silas helped Ben and Thomas through the small opening. The water was now up to their waists. It was freezing cold. Elias was the last one. He waited until everyone was safe. He felt the heavy weight of the iron gate pressing down on his shoulders. With a final, powerful jump, Elias dived under the gate. He landed in the water on the other side. The iron gate hit the stone floor with a massive, heavy sound. The water on the other side hit the gate, but the gate was strong. It held the water back. Elias stood up slowly. He was completely wet. His heart was beating like a drum. He looked at his crew. They were all safe, but they were exhausted. They were in a small, dry room. The sound of the trapped water was a dull roar behind the iron door. Elias stood up and shook the water from his hair. His clothes were heavy and cold. He looked at his crew. They were all breathing hard. Silas was sitting on the floor, leaning against a stone wall. Sarah was checking her leather tube to make sure the map was dry. "Is everyone okay?" Elias asked. His voice echoed in the small space. "I am wet, but I am alive," Ben said. He gave a small, tired smile. Thomas and Martha nodded. They were exhausted, but they were safe. Elias turned his attention to the room. It was not a tunnel. It was a perfect square room made of smooth, white stone. The air here was dry and smelled like old dust and dried flowers. There were no windows, but a soft, green light came from the ceiling. Elias looked up. Small, glowing stones were set into the rock. "Look at the walls," Sarah whispered. She walked to the side of the room. The walls were covered in tall wooden shelves. The wood was very dark and looked very expensive. On the shelves, there were hundreds of rolled papers and heavy books. Some of the papers were yellow with age. Elias walked to a shelf and picked up a map. He unrolled it carefully. It was a map of a different ocean, with stars he did not recognize. "This is a library," Elias said. "A library in the middle of a mountain." Sarah moved quickly from shelf to shelf. Her eyes were bright with excitement. She forgot about her wet clothes. "These are not just maps, Elias. These are records of the sea from a long time ago. Look at this one." She showed him a large drawing of a ship that looked like a giant bird. "But where is the gold?" Silas asked. He stood up and looked around the room. He pushed a small wooden chair with his boot. "We went through a storm and a water trap. I expected to see chests of silver and gold coins." Elias looked around the room too. There were many beautiful things, but there were no coins. There were no jewels. There were only papers, books, and old instruments for measuring the stars. He felt a moment of disappointment, but then he looked at the far wall. There was a large painting of a king. The king was wearing a silver chain, and in his hand, he held a small wooden box. The treasure is not here, Sarah said. She was reading a small book with a red cover. This room was built for the king's wise men. They studied the ocean here. But the book says the gold is kept in the heart of the Mirror Island. The heart of the island? Elias asked. Are we not in the heart now? No, Sarah replied. She pointed to a map on the table. This mountain is only the beginning. There is a second island nearby. It is called the Mirror Island because the rocks are like glass. The gold is there, locked with the second key. Elias looked at the silver key in his hand. He understood now. This journey was much longer than he thought. They had the maps and the knowledge. But the real prize was still waiting across the sea. We have what we need, Elias told his crew. Collect the most important maps. We must find the exit and get back to the Iron Whale. Captain Morgan is still outside, and we have a new destination. The secret room was quiet now. The only sound was the breathing of the tired sailors and the soft rustle of paper as Sarah moved the old maps. Elias walked to the back of the room. He looked at the tall wooden shelves again. He felt that there was something more in this room. A library was good for knowledge, but a king usually kept his most important things in a safe place. Elias moved a row of very thick, heavy books. The books were covered in green leather and smelled like old earth. Behind the books, there was a small, dark hole in the stone wall. Elias reached into the hole. His fingers touched something small and hard. He pulled it out slowly. It was a small wooden box. The box was not bigger than his hand. It was made of a very dark, polished wood that felt as smooth as silk. On the top of the box, there was a large red seal made of wax. The seal showed a crown and a sword. It looked very official and very old. Sarah, look at this, Elias said. He walked back to the center of the room and placed the box on the white stone table. Sarah stopped looking at her maps. She came to the table and looked at the red seal. That is the seal of King Alaric, she whispered. He was the one who built this mountain. This box has been closed for 100 years. Silas and Martha gathered around the table. The orange light from their torches made long shadows on the walls. Everyone was looking at the small box. Elias felt a sense of mystery. He took his small knife from his belt. He used the sharp blade to cut the red wax carefully. The wax broke into small, dry pieces. Elias lifted the lid of the box. There was no gold inside. There were no jewels. Instead, there was a small piece of blue velvet cloth. Elias lifted the cloth. Underneath, he found a piece of white parchment and a small, heavy ring made of silver. The ring had a red stone in the middle. Sarah picked up the parchment. Her hands were shaking a little bit. She read the words out loud. Her voice was steady but low. To the one who finds this room, the silver key opened the path of stone. The golden key lies where the sun meets the mirror. Use the ring to see the way when the moon is full. The ring? Silas asked. He looked at the silver ring in Elias's hand. How can a ring show the way? The red stone, Sarah said. She held the ring up to the green light from the ceiling. It is not a normal stone. It is a crystal. I think it works with the light. On Mirror Island, the rocks are like glass. Maybe the light from the moon goes through this stone and points to the golden key. Elias put the ring on his finger. It was a bit large, but it felt powerful. So, the golden key is not here. It is on the next island. And we need this ring to find it. We have everything now, Elias said. He closed the empty box and put the parchment in his pocket. The maps, the information about Mirror Island, and the King's Ring. Now we just have to get out of this mountain before Morgan's men find the entrance. He looked at the iron gate. They could not go back the way they came because of the water trap. They had to find the second exit that Sarah mentioned. The map shows a small tunnel behind the king's painting. Sarah said. She pointed to the large picture on the wall. It leads to the other side of the mountain, near the sea. Then let's move. Elias commanded. We have a long voyage ahead of us. Elias stood in front of the large painting of King Alaric. The king in the picture looked very strong. He had a crown of silver and a long red coat. His eyes seemed to watch Elias. Sarah walked to the edge of the heavy wooden frame. She looked for a button or a handle. The king's ring has a red stone. Sarah said. She looked at the ring on Elias's finger. And the box had a red seal. Look at the king's hand in the painting. He is wearing the same ring. Elias looked closely. In the painting, the king's finger pointed toward a small red flower on the wall. Elias reached out and pressed the stone flower. It did not move at first. He pushed harder. Suddenly, the whole painting moved back. It made a low, scraping sound against the stone floor. A small, dark door opened behind it. This is the way out. Elias said. He held his torch into the opening. The tunnel was narrow and the air was fresh. It did not smell like dust anymore. It smelled like salt and the open sea. The group stepped into the narrow passage. They had to walk in a single line. The walls were not smooth here. They were rough like a natural cave. As they walked, Sarah looked at the red wax pieces she still held in her hand. The red seal is very important. She whispered to Elias. It is the mark of the Royal Navy from 100 years ago. King Alaric was a great leader, but he was also a secret pirate. He stole this gold from the Spanish ships and hid it here. So the Navy and the pirates are both looking for the same thing. Elias replied. They walked for 10 minutes. The tunnel began to go up. Finally, they saw a small circle of light in the distance. It was not the green light of the glowing stones. It was the white light of the moon. They reached the end of the tunnel and stepped out onto a high stone ledge. The view was beautiful and scary. They were high on the back of the mountain. Below them, the dark blue ocean hit the black rocks with a powerful white spray. The wind was very strong here. It pulled at their wet clothes. Look there. Martha said. She pointed to the right. Far below, they could see a small campfire on a different part of the beach. It was a red light in the dark night. Next to the fire, there were men moving. Morgan's men. Silas said. They are not at the gate. They are searching the whole island. They are looking for another way in. Elias looked at the red seal in his mind. He looked at the red fire on the beach. The color red was everywhere. It was a color of kings. But it was also the color of danger. We cannot go down to the beach here. Elias said. The rocks are too sharp. We must walk along the mountain and find a path back to the Iron Whale. We have the maps and the ring. We must leave this island before the sun comes up. The group moved quietly along the narrow ledge. The moon was bright, and the silver ring on Elias's finger shone in the light. They were safe for now, but the hunt was getting closer. The descent from the mountain was very difficult. The path was narrow and full of loose stones. Every time a stone fell, it made a sharp sound against the rocks. Elias held his breath. He did not want Morgan's men to hear them. The moon was high and cast long, dark shadows across the cliffs. Finally, they reached the bottom. The trees of the jungle were thick and dark. Elias led the way through the bushes. They moved toward the spot where they had hidden their small wooden boat. The smell of the salty sea was very strong now. Through the leaves, Elias saw the white sand of the beach. It looked like snow under the moonlight. There is the boat. Silas whispered. He pointed to the small shape on the sand. They stepped out from the trees. The beach was wide and open. They felt very vulnerable. They ran toward the boat as fast as they could. Their boots made soft thumping sounds on the sand. They were only 20 feet away when a bright light appeared. A torch was lit behind a large palm tree. Then another, and another. Suddenly, the beach was full of orange light. 10 men stepped out from the shadows. They wore dirty clothes and carried long, sharp swords. In the middle of the group stood a man with a red scarf around his neck. It was Morgan's first mate, a cruel man named Black Dog. "Stop right there, Captain Elias," Black Dog said. He smiled, and his teeth looked yellow in the torchlight. "We knew you would come back to your boat. Give us the silver key and the map, and maybe we will let you live." Elias did not stop. He pulled his sword from his belt. The metal reflected the fire of the torches. "You will get nothing from us," Elias replied. His voice was steady and hard. "Then you will die on this sand," Black Dog shouted. The pirates ran forward. The battle began instantly. The sound of metal hitting metal was sharp and constant. Elias blocked a heavy blow from a pirate's sword. He pushed the man back and turned to help Sarah. Sarah was using a thick wooden stick to defend herself. She was fast and moved like a cat. Silas and Martha fought bravely. Silas was very strong. He used his heavy boots to kick a pirate into the shallow water. A loud gunshot echoed across the beach, and a cloud of white smoke rose into the air. The bullet hit the sand near Elias's feet, throwing cold grains into the air. "To the boat!" Elias screamed. "Ben! Thomas! Push it into the water!" The 2 sailors grabbed the edges of the wooden boat. They pushed with all their strength. The boat slid across the wet sand and into the waves. "Get in! Now!" Elias commanded. Martha and Sarah jumped into the boat. Silas stayed behind with Elias to hold the pirates back. They fought side by side. The pirates were many, but they were not as disciplined as Elias's crew. Elias found an opening and struck Black Dog's sword out of his hand. The pirate fell back into the sand. "Go!" Silas yelled. Elias and Silas jumped into the water. It was freezing cold. They climbed into the boat just as the pirates reached the water's edge. Ben and Thomas pulled the oars hard. The boat moved away from the shore. The pirates stood on the beach, shouting with anger. They fired their guns, but the bullets only hit the water. Elias looked back. He saw the torches getting smaller. They had survived the beach, but he knew the real battle was only beginning. The sailors rowed the small boat as fast as they could. Their muscles were tight and sore. The wood of the heavy oars felt hot in their hands. Elias looked back at the shore. The torches of the pirates were now only small orange dots in the distance. The beach was far away, but the danger was still very close. "Faster, men," Elias said. He looked at the dark water. "We must reach the ship before Morgan moves his big vessel." They reached the side of the Iron Whale in a few minutes. The sailors on the deck were ready. They dropped a long rope ladder down the side of the ship. Elias, Sarah, and the others climbed up quickly. As soon as Elias stepped onto the deck, he began to give orders. His voice was loud and firm. "Raise the anchor," he shouted. "Silas, get the men to the sails. We are leaving this bay right now." The ship became a busy place. Sailors ran across the wooden deck. 2 strong men turned the large iron handle to pull the heavy anchor up from the sea floor. The metal chain made a long, grinding noise. High above, the sailors untied the ropes. The large white sails fell down and caught the light night wind. Sarah ran to the back of the ship. She looked through her brass telescope. "Elias, the serpent is moving," she cried out. "They are raising their sails too." They are trying to block the exit of the bay. Elias ran to the large wooden wheel. He grabbed it with both hands. He looked at the high, dark rocks at the entrance of the hidden bay. It was very dark, and the passage was narrow. He had to be very careful. If the ship hit the rocks, they would sink in the middle of the night. We need more speed. Elias yelled. Martha, tell the men to use the secondary sails. The ship began to move faster. The water made a white foam at the front of the boat. The iron whale moved toward the gap in the stones. Elias saw the red sails of the Serpent in the distance. Morgan's ship was large and fast. It was moving toward the same gap. It was a race to the open sea. They are going to hit us. Ben shouted. He looked at the dark shape of the rival ship. No, they won't. Elias said. He stayed very calm. He turned the wheel just a little bit to the left. The ship moved closer to the dark stone wall. The rocks were so close that the sailors could almost touch them. It was a dangerous move, but it was the only way. The iron whale slid through the narrow passage just seconds before the Serpent reached it. Morgan's ship was too wide to follow them through the narrowest part of the rocks. It had to slow down to avoid the stones. We are through. Sarah shouted. The ship reached the open ocean. The waves were larger here, and the wind was much stronger. The iron whale leaned to the side as it caught the full force of the wind. The island began to disappear into the night mist. Elias did not stop. He kept the ship moving toward the deep blue water. Keep the lights dark. Elias told his crew. We do not want them to see where we are going. We travel by the stars tonight. He looked at the silver ring on his finger. They were safer now, but the map to Mirror Island was waiting. They had escaped the trap, but the hunt was still on. The open ocean was very quiet. The wind was steady, and the iron whale moved smoothly through the dark water. The crew was tired after the battle on the beach. Most of the sailors were sleeping in their small beds below the deck. Only Silas and a few others stayed awake to watch the stars and guide the ship. Elias and Sarah were in the captain's cabin. A single candle burned on the wooden table. It made a small circle of yellow light in the dark room. The map of mirrors was spread out on the table. Elias took the silver ring from his pocket and looked at the red stone. The stone was dark now, but it felt warm in his hand. The parchment said to use the ring when the moon is full. Sarah whispered. She looked out the small window of the cabin. The moon was a perfect, bright circle in the black sky. The moon is full tonight. Elias. We must try it now. Elias stood up and walked to the window. He held the silver ring in the white light of the moon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a thin beam of red light came out of the red stone. It was like a tiny, bright needle. Bring the map here. Elias said. Sarah moved the old map into the moonlight. Elias held the ring over the paper. The red light touched the surface of the map. As he moved his hand, the red light began to reveal hidden lines on the old paper. These lines were not visible in the sunlight or the candlelight. They were secret paths drawn with a special kind of ink. Look, Sarah said. She pointed to a new shape appearing on the map. That is not the island we just left. That is Mirror Island. It is much further south, near the edge of the world. The red light showed a path through a group of dangerous rocks. It also showed a drawing of a mountain that looked like a giant tooth. Next to the mountain, there was a small symbol of a sun and a mirror. The golden key is there. Elias said. He felt a new sense of hope. The library in the mountain was just the first step. The real treasure is waiting for us at the end of this red line. Sarah took a pencil and carefully drew over the secret lines before the moon moved behind a cloud. It is a long way. Elias. The water there is very deep, and the weather is unpredictable. And Morgan, he will not stop. He will see us sailing south, and he will follow. I know. Elias replied. He looked at the ring on his finger. But we have a better map now. We have the king's secret. Morgan is only following our shadow. We are following the light. Elias walked out of the cabin and onto the deck. The air was cool and salty. He looked up at the tall masts of the iron whale. The ship looked strong and ready. Silas. Elias called out. Silas walked over to the captain. Yes. Elias. Change the course. Elias commanded. Turn the ship to the south. We are going to Mirror Island. Silas nodded and went to the wheel. The ship began to turn slowly. The front of the boat pointed toward the empty horizon. The next part of their great adventure had begun. The journey south took many days. The warm, tropical air of the Caribbean began to fade, replaced by a sharp, biting chill. The sailors traded their thin shirts for heavy wool coats and thick leather boots. The sky was no longer a bright, clear blue. It was a pale, misty gray that seemed to touch the tops of the waves. The iron whale cut through the water, which had turned a deep, dark indigo. The temperature is dropping fast. Silas remarked one morning. He was standing at the bow, his breath turning into small white clouds in the air. I've sailed these waters before, but never this far south. The ocean feels different here. It's too quiet. Elias stood beside him, his hands deep in his pockets. He felt the weight of the silver ring against his palm. The map showed the Mirror Sea. We must be close. Look at the water. Silas. Elias pointed to the surface of the ocean. Small pieces of ice, as clear as diamonds, floated in the waves. They didn't look like normal ice. They were jagged and sharp, reflecting the pale sun like shards of broken glass. As the ship moved, the hull made a clinking sound as it pushed the ice aside. It sounded like 1,000 tiny bells ringing at once. Sarah came up from the charts room, wrapping a thick scarf around her neck. She held the updated map, her fingers red from the cold. According to the secret lines, we should be seeing the giant's tooth any hour now. The currents are pulling us exactly where the king's ring pointed. Captain. Martha's voice drifted down from the crow's nest, muffled by the thick mist. Land ho. But it doesn't look like land. Elias grabbed his telescope and leveled it at the horizon. Through the grey haze, a massive shape appeared. It was a mountain, just as the map had promised, shaped like a long, crooked tooth reaching for the sky. But it wasn't made of green trees or brown earth. The entire island sparked and shimmered. The cliffs were made of a translucent, glass-like rock that caught the weak sunlight and threw it back in a dazzling array of colors. Mirror Island. Sarah whispered, standing close to Elias. It's beautiful and terrifying. As they drew nearer, the reflections became almost blinding. The island acted like a giant prism. Beams of light shot across the water, crossing each other in complex patterns. Elias realized then why the king had left the ring. In this maze of light and reflections, a normal compass would be useless. The glare made it impossible to tell where the water ended and the land began. Reduce sail. Elias commanded. We need to go slow. These glass rocks will cut through our hull like a knife through paper. The crew moved with renewed energy, despite the cold. They were fascinated by the shimmering world ahead of them. But Elias kept his eyes on the water behind them. The mist was thick, but he couldn't shake the feeling that a dark shape was lurking just out of sight. Morgan wouldn't let the treasure go that easily, and in this world of mirrors, a shadow was the most dangerous thing of all. Prepare the small boats. Elias told Silas. We find the entrance to the heart before the sun sets. We don't want to be caught in this light show when the moon takes over. The small wooden boat crunched against the shore, But the sound wasn't the soft thud of sand. It was the sharp, melodic shattering of 1,000 tiny crystals. The beach of Mirror Island was composed of crushed, translucent rock that looked like diamonds but felt like broken glass. Elias stepped out, his heavy leather boots thick enough to protect his feet, but he could feel the strange vibration of the island beneath him. "Stay on the path of the shadows," Elias warned, holding his hand up to shield his eyes. Even with the sun low in the sky, the reflections from the cliffs were painful. If you step into a direct beam of light, you'll be blinded before you can take another step. Sarah followed closely, clutching the leather tube. She looked around in awe. The trees here weren't made of wood. They were tall, jagged pillars of quartz-like stone that hummed when the wind blew through them. The air was freezing, and the salt spray from the ocean had frozen into delicate, crystalline patterns on the rocks. The king's message said the golden key lies where the sun meets the mirror. Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly from the cold. "Look at the giant's tooth. Elias. The sun is hitting the peak." At the very top of the jagged mountain, the setting sun was a deep, bloody orange. As the light hit the crystalline tip of the mountain, it didn't just glow, it split. A single beam of orange light shot downward, bouncing off a flat, mirror-like cliff face. Then another, creating a zigzag of light that descended toward the base of the mountain. "It's a light path," Silas said, stepping carefully over a shard of glass rock. "It's showing us the way." Elias looked at the silver ring on his finger. The red stone began to pulse with a low, rhythmic light, reacting to the setting sun. As they reached the spot where the final beam of light hit the ground, they found themselves standing before a wall of solid, clear crystal. It looked like a dead end, but the red stone on Elias's ring was now glowing so brightly it was almost hot. "The ring," Sarah prompted. "Hold it up to the beam." Elias stepped into the path of the orange light and raised his hand. As the sun's ray passed through the red crystal of the ring, the light turned from orange to a brilliant, deep crimson. The red beam hit the crystal wall, and suddenly, the solid rock began to change. The reflections shifted, and the wall became a doorway. It wasn't a physical door moving, but a trick of light and transparency. The path was suddenly clear, leading deep into the heart of the mirror. "Quickly," Elias urged. "The sun is almost down. Once the light fades, the door will vanish." They scrambled through the opening just as the last sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon. Behind them, the crystal wall shimmered and returned to its opaque, mirror-like state. They were inside. The air inside was perfectly still and smelled like ozone. The only light came from the glowing red ring on Elias's finger and the faint, blue luminescence of the walls. They were standing at the top of a long, spiraling staircase made of pure, clear glass that led down into a glowing chamber far below. "The golden chamber," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide. "We've found the heart of the mirror." But as they started their descent, a low, rumbling sound echoed from the entrance they had just used. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of heavy boots and muffled voices. Morgan hadn't been far behind. The spiral stairs felt like walking on frozen air. Every step Elias took echoed through the vast, hollow space beneath the mountain. As they descended, the blue luminescence of the walls shifted into a warm, radiant gold. They finally reached the floor of the chamber, and even Silas, who had seen the wonders of the seven seas, gasped. The room was a perfect dodecahedron, 12 flat, crystalline faces that met at sharp angles. In the center of the room stood a pedestal made of solid white marble, and resting upon it was the legendary golden anchor. It wasn't a full-sized ship's anchor, but a small, intricate statuette, no larger than a loaf of bread, cast in a gold so pure it seemed to glow with its own internal fire. "It's not just gold," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with a scholar's fever. "Look at the base. It's a mechanism." Elias stepped closer. The pedestal had two distinct features. A narrow keyhole shaped exactly like the silver key from Port Royal. A circular lens made of clear diamond, positioned directly above the keyhole. The silver key opens the lock. Elias realized. But the ring provides the power. Hurry, Elias. Martha urged, her hand on her sword. The sound of boots on the glass stairs was getting louder. They're almost at the bottom. Elias didn't hesitate. He pulled the silver key from his pocket. The key that had started this entire journey in a dusty shop weeks ago. He slid it into the marble pedestal. It turned with a smooth, silent grace. Deep within the floor, something heavy began to shift. A low hum, like the sound of a giant beehive, filled the room. Now the ring. Sarah cried. Elias held his hand over the diamond lens. The red stone in the ring caught the ambient golden light of the room and focused it into a single, intense beam. The crimson light passed through the diamond, turning into a brilliant violet ray that struck the golden anchor. The artifact didn't just glow. It awakened. The golden flukes of the anchor began to spin slowly, and the air in the room grew warm. A holographic map of the entire Caribbean began to project into the air above them, showing hidden currents, lost shipwrecks, and, most importantly, the true location of the king's hidden fleet. Magnificent! A cold, raspy voice echoed from the stairs. Elias turned. Captain Morgan stood at the base of the staircase, his red coat tattered and his eyes wild with greed. 10 of his strongest men stood behind him, their pistols leveled at Elias's crew. "You've done the hard work for me, boy," Morgan said, stepping into the golden light. He looked at the projected map with a hunger that made Elias's skin crawl. The silver anchor was never just about gold. It's about the power to rule the waves. With those currents, no navy ship could ever catch me. I'd be the king of the sea. "You're a thief, Morgan," Elias said, stepping in front of the pedestal to block the light. "This belongs to the history of the islands, not to a murderer like you. History is written by the survivors." Morgan sneered, drawing a heavy, silver-plated pistol. "And you, Captain, are about to become a footnote." The air in the chamber crackled with energy. The golden anchor spun faster, its hum rising to a whistle. The final confrontation had arrived. The air in the golden chamber was thick with the smell of ozone and the high-pitched whistle of the spinning artifact. Captain Morgan's finger tightened on the trigger of his silver-plated pistol. He didn't wait for a parley. He fired. The loud crack of the gunshot echoed a dozen times off the crystalline walls. But in this room of mirrors, nothing was where it seemed. The bullet struck a facet of the wall 3 feet to Elias's left, whined as it ricocheted, and buried itself in the marble pedestal. "The light!" Sarah shouted, shielding her eyes. "It's distorting the space." "At them!" Morgan roared, waving his sword. "Kill the boy and bring me that anchor." The pirates surged forward, but the geometry of the room turned the battle into a nightmare of confusion. Because of the 12-sided crystalline structure, every person in the room was reflected 100 times. There were 1,000 Eliases, 1,000 Morgans, and 1,000 flashing blades. Elias stepped forward to meet Morgan. He didn't look at the reflections. He listened for the sound of boots on the glass floor and the heavy breathing of his enemy. He felt a rush of wind to his right and parried instinctively. The ring on his finger flared brilliant violet as his steel blade met Morgan's. "You're out of your depth, Elias," Morgan hissed, his face twisted in a mask of greed. "I've spent 40 years taking what I want from this ocean. A silver ring won't save you. You've spent 40 years destroying what you should have protected." Elias countered. He pivoted, using the slippery glass floor to slide behind a crystalline pillar. The rest of the crew was locked in a chaotic struggle. Silas used his immense strength to hurl a pirate against a wall, while Martha moved like a shadow, her twin daggers finding the gaps in the pirates' defenses. Sarah stayed by the pedestal, her eyes fixed on the holographic map. Elias. The anchor is reaching critical speed. She warned. If we don't stabilize the light, the whole chamber will shatter. Morgan heard her. He realized the power was peaking. With a desperate cry, he shoved Elias back and lunged toward the pedestal. He didn't want the map. He wanted the source. He reached out his calloused, scarred hand to grab the spinning golden anchor. No! Elias screamed. As Morgan's fingers touched the golden metal, the violet light from the ring and the golden light from the artifact collided. The room didn't explode, it screamed. A massive discharge of pure energy erupted from the pedestal. Morgan was thrown backward across the room, hitting a crystal wall with enough force to crack the stone. The pirates, terrified by the supernatural display, turned and fled back toward the spiral stairs. Elias ran to the pedestal. The golden anchor was now glowing a steady, peaceful white. The holographic map shifted, focusing on a single point on the horizon, the true home of the king's treasure. Is he? Sarah whispered, looking at Morgan's crumpled form. He's alive. Elias said, checking the pirate captain's pulse. But his hunt is over. The island has judged him. The chamber began to vibrate. The blue luminescence of the walls was fading, and the warm gold was turning back to cold, transparent rock. The sun had fully set, and the mirror was closing. We have to go, Elias said, grabbing the golden anchor. It was cool to the touch now. Now! They gathered Silas, Martha, and the others, leaving the unconscious Morgan behind. They raced up the glass stairs as the mountain groaned. They reached the surface just as the moonlight hit the island, turning the giant's tooth into a beacon of cold, white fire. The journey from Mirror Island felt like a dream. Behind them, the crystalline mountain faded into the mist, a shimmering ghost in the moonlight. The iron whale sailed south by southeast, guided no longer by old paper maps, but by the steady, pulsing light of the golden anchor. Elias kept the artifact on the pedestal in his cabin. It didn't just show a path, it seemed to calm the very sea around them. The coordinates are reaching 0. Sarah said, her voice soft with awe. She stood at the bow beside Elias. The air was no longer freezing. A warm, floral breeze began to drift over the deck, smelling of jasmine and ancient earth. As the morning sun broke the horizon, the mist parted. They weren't looking at a single island, but a hidden archipelago, a ring of emerald green land surrounding a perfectly still, deep blue lagoon. In the center of the lagoon sat the true king's legacy, a fleet of 12 magnificent ships, their hulls made of dark teak and their masts topped with silver. They weren't pirate ships or warships. They were vessels of discovery, laden with the lost knowledge of a century. It's a sanctuary, Silas whispered, taking off his hat in respect. He didn't hide the gold to keep it. He hid the future. They anchored the iron whale in the calm water. Elias, Sarah, and the others rowed to the largest ship, the Ethelgard. Inside its great hall, they found not just chests of gold coins and uncut gems, but thousands of books, preserved seeds from across the world, and navigational tools that were decades ahead of their time. Morgan wanted power, Elias said, running his hand over a silver-bound ledger. But King Alaric wanted progress. This wealth isn't for one man to rule the sea. It's to build a world where the sea connects us instead of dividing us. Sarah found a final letter sealed with the same red wax as the box in the mountain. It was addressed to the finders. It spoke of a dream where Port Royal was a center of learning, where sailors were explorers, not thieves. It gave the finders the right to use the wealth to establish a new order, the Order of the Silver Anchor. What do we do now, Captain? Martha asked. She looked at the piles of gold, then at the vast library. Elias looked out over the lagoon. He thought of the dusty shop in Port Royal where he had found a simple silver key. He thought of the storms, the traps, and the battle on the glass floor. He looked at his crew, his family. We don't take it back to the governors or the pirates. Elias decided. We bring the scholars, the builders, and the dreamers here. We protect this place. We become the guardians of the legacy. As the sun climbed higher, Elias felt a strange sense of peace. The silver ring on his finger caught the light, but it didn't glow with a warning anymore. It shone with a steady, hopeful brilliance. The hunt was over, and a new era was beginning. Ready the crew. Elias commanded, a smile finally touching his face. We have a lot of work to do. The gold was a heavy weight, but the responsibility was heavier. The morning air in the hidden lagoon was thick with the scent of tropical flowers and the rhythmic hammers hitting wood. The sailors of the Iron Whale were no longer just men of the sea. They were becoming architects of a new world. Elias stood on the deck of the Ethelgard, the massive flagship of King Alaric's lost fleet, watching his crew work. We need a proper dock here, Captain, Silas said, wiping sweat from his brow. He was carrying a beam of dark mahogany that looked like it weighed as much as a small cannon. The lagoon is calm, but if a storm rolls in from the south, these ships will bounce against each other like dice in a cup. We need to anchor them to the land, not just the sea floor. Elias nodded. Silas was right. The archipelago was a paradise, but it was a fragile one. Use the wood from the secondary storage on the Ethelgard. It's seasoned oak, strong enough to hold. And Silas, make sure the men are taking breaks. They've been working since the sun touched the horizon. Below the waterline, Sarah was busy with a different kind of construction. She had taken over the great hall of the flagship, turning it into a massive archive. Thousands of books, their covers made of vellum and dragon-scale leather, were being carefully catalogued. She moved between the shelves with a small lantern, her eyes bright with a feverish intensity. Elias, look at this, she said, not even looking up as he entered the room. She pointed to a series of glass jars filled with strange, shimmering seeds. These aren't just for food. The labels say they are resilient earth. They are engineered to grow in salt-heavy soil. King Alaric wasn't just hiding treasure. He was planning for a time when the islands might fail to provide. He was a visionary, Elias said, leaning against a shelf. But visions require protection. We are a small crew. Sarah, if word of this place gets out, if one of our sailors talks in a tavern back in Port Royal, the Navy will be here in a week. Or worse, the pirates who escaped Morgan's Fall. That's why we have the golden anchor, she replied, gesturing to the glowing artifact on the central table. It's more than a map. I've been reading the journals. It's a key to the atmospheric currents. It can literally pull the mist around these islands like a blanket. We can stay hidden, but only if we learn how to speak its language. Elias touched the silver ring on his finger. It felt cool, but it hummed when he stood near the anchor. He felt the weight of the 20 sailors who looked to him for more than just a paycheck now. They were the first citizens of a country that didn't exist yet. It was a beautiful thought, but as he looked out the porthole at the sparkling blue water, he couldn't help but feel a lingering chill. Somewhere out there, the world was still turning, and it was a world that didn't like secrets it couldn't control. The second week in the lagoon brought a strange discovery. While exploring the lower decks of the Ethelgard, Martha had found a room that was sealed not with a lock, but with a series of silver mirrors. When the light of a torch hit them at the right angle, a hidden door slid open, revealing a chamber filled with strange, wax-covered cylinders and a brass machine with a large, flared horn. "What is this, Sarah?" Martha asked, her voice echoing in the small, metallic room. Sarah followed her in, her breath catching in her throat. She recognized the machine from the drawings in the king's library. It's a voice catcher. It's an ancient way to record sound using vibrations on wax. Elias. You need to see this. Elias arrived minutes later. He watched as Sarah carefully placed one of the cylinders onto the brass machine. She turned a small hand crank, and a low, scratching sound filled the room. It sounded like the wind at first, but then, a voice emerged from the noise, a deep, resonant voice that carried the weight of a crown. I am Alaric. The voice said, sounding both close and 1,000 miles away. If you are hearing this, then the silver anchor has found its true master. You have seen the gold. You have seen the ships. But you must understand the burden you now carry. This wealth was not stolen for greed. It was taken because the great tide is coming. The sailors in the room went silent. The term great tide sounded ominous. The powers of the East and the West are growing too hungry. The voice continued. They will turn the oceans into a graveyard of iron and smoke. This sanctuary is not just a hiding place. It is a seed. You must use the knowledge here to build ships that do not need the wind, and walls that do not break. You are the guardians of the end of the world. The cylinder stopped spinning, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Elias looked at his hands. He had thought he was a pirate, then a captain, then a leader. Now, it felt like he was being asked to be a savior. Ships that do not need the wind. Silas asked, his voice skeptical. That's madness. Even the iron whale needs the breeze. Maybe not. Sarah said, her mind already racing. She pointed to a set of blueprints on the wall that they hadn't noticed before. They showed a ship with a large, rotating engine in its belly, a design that looked nothing like anything in the Royal Navy. The king was working on something he called thermal steam, using the heat from the volcanic vents under the island to power a turbine. Elias realized then that the treasure was much more dangerous than gold. If the British Navy got hold of plans for steam-powered ships, they would rule the world forever. If a man like Morgan got them, he would burn it down. We need to keep this room secret. Elias commanded. Even from the rest of the crew for now. We don't want to spark a panic about a great tide, until we know what it means. Martha, you stay on watch here. Sarah, find every blueprint related to these engines. We need to know if we can actually build them. He walked out onto the deck. The sun was setting, painting the lagoon in shades of violet. It looked peaceful, but Elias knew the voice of the king was a warning. The past was reaching out to the present, and it was demanding a future they weren't yet prepared to build. It happened on the 14th night. The moon was a thin sliver of silver, and the lagoon was shrouded in a natural fog that clung to the water like a thick white wool. Elias was walking the perimeter of the beach, the sand crunching softly under his boots. He liked the quiet of the night. It was the only time he didn't have to be the captain. Suddenly, he stopped. His silver ring began to vibrate, not a warm hum, but a sharp, cold sting. He looked out toward the entrance of the lagoon, the narrow gap between the high cliffs that they had guarded so carefully. In the middle of the mist, a shape was moving. It wasn't a ship, at least, not a ship that Elias recognized. It was low in the water, dark, and silent. It moved without the sound of oars or the snapping of sails. Silas. Elias hissed into his radio, a short-range device Sarah had managed to get working from the ship's old supplies. I see it, Captain. Silas's voice crackled back. He was positioned on the cliffside with a telescope. It's small, like a rowboat, but made of something dark. Metal, maybe. It's moving toward the Ethel Guard. Elias didn't wait. He ran toward the docks, his heart hammering against his ribs. If someone had found the archipelago, their peace was over. He reached the pier just as Martha arrived, her daggers already drawn. Is it Morgan? She whispered. I don't think so. Elias said. Morgan doesn't do silent. He does cannons and screaming. The dark shape reached the side of the flagship. A figure draped in a grey cloak stood up and reached for the rope ladder. Elias and Martha moved quickly, hidden by the shadows of the crates on the pier. As the figure stepped onto the deck of the Ethel Guard, Elias stepped out, his sword leveled at the stranger's throat. You've come a long way to die in a hidden lagoon, Elias said, his voice cold. The figure didn't move. Slowly, they reached up and pulled back their hood. It wasn't a pirate. It was a woman, her face marked by a long, thin scar and eyes that looked like they had seen the bottom of the ocean. She was wearing a uniform that Elias recognized with a jolt of fear, the intelligence division of the British Royal Navy. Captain Elias, I presume, she said, her voice surprisingly calm. My name is Commander Vane, and you are remarkably difficult to find. How did you get past our scouts? Martha demanded, her blade inches from the woman's side. Scouts look for sails and wakes. Vane replied, glancing at her small, metal boat. They don't look for a submersible craft powered by a clockwork spring. I've been trailing you since Mirror Island. Captain, you left a trail of light in the water that only a specialist could see. Elias felt a cold dread. If you're here, where is your fleet? I'm alone, Vane said. For now. The Navy doesn't know about this place yet. I'm a seeker of anomalies, not a conqueror. But I suggest we talk. Captain, because the great tide the king spoke of isn't just a prophecy. It's a fleet of ironclads being built in London, and they are looking for the silver anchor to power them. If they find you, they won't ask for permission to take your legacy. Elias lowered his sword, but only an inch. Why tell us this? Because, Vane said, looking at the glowing golden anchor through the cabin window. I've seen what happens when the crown gets too much power, and I think I'd rather see a pirate try to build a world than see a king destroy one. The tension in the captain's cabin was so thick you could cut it with a cutlass. Commander Vane sat at the table, her wet cloak draped over a chair. Sarah, Silas, and Martha stood behind Elias, their faces a mix of suspicion and curiosity. The golden anchor sat between them, its white light reflecting in Vane's cold, grey eyes. You're asking us to trust a spy, Silas said, crossing his massive arms. In my experience, spies only tell you the truth when the lie is too expensive to maintain. Vane leaned forward. I am a realist, Mr. Silas. The Royal Navy has 10 dreadnought-class ships under construction. They are twice the size of your iron whale, plated in steel, and armed with rifled cannons that can hit a target from 3 miles away. But they have a problem. The coal they use is inefficient. They need the living fuel that King Alaric discovered, the same energy that powers that anchor. How do you know about the living fuel? Sarah asked, her hand hovering over her journals. Because Alaric didn't work alone, Vane revealed. My grandfather was his lead engineer before the king was forced into exile. The blueprints you found. There are copies in a vault in London, but they are incomplete. They lack the catalyst, the silver ring. Elias looked at the ring on his finger. It felt heavier than ever. So, as long as I have this, their ships are just expensive piles of floating iron. For now. Vane agreed. But they are sending a man named Admiral Graves to the Caribbean. He doesn't care about secrecy. He plans to burn every island from Port Royal to the Tortugas until he finds the source of the energy signal. He will find this lagoon. Elias. It's just a matter of time. So what is your proposal? Elias asked. We strike first. Vane said. Graves is currently docked at a secret naval base on the island of St. Jude. He has the incomplete engine there, trying to make it work with inferior crystals. If we destroy the engine and the research, we set their program back by 10 years. It gives you the time you need to build your sanctuary. It's a suicide mission. Martha pointed out. A hidden lagoon is one thing. Attacking a guarded Navy base is another. Not if we use the iron whale and my submersible. Vane countered. We move under the water. They won't see us until the gunpowder is already lit. Elias looked at his crew. He saw the fear in Ben and Thomas's eyes, but he also saw the determination in Sarah and Silas. They had found a home, and they weren't ready to lose it. But he also saw the danger in Vane. She was a woman of secrets, and she was playing a very long game. We need a vote. Elias said, "This isn't just my ship anymore. It's our future." The crew spent the rest of the night debating. Sarah wanted the technology at St. Jude to complete her own research. Silas wanted to ensure the Navy couldn't reach their shores. Martha was wary but knew that a defensive war was a losing one. In the end, they reached a decision. "We'll do it," Elias told Vane as the first light of dawn hit the lagoon. "But you stay under Martha's watch every second of the day. If this is a trap, you'll be the first one to feed the sharks." Vane gave a thin, grim smile. "Fair enough, Captain. Let's go break some iron." Before they could leave for St. Jude, Elias knew they needed a structure. If he died in the mission, the colony in the lagoon would fall into chaos. He gathered the 20 sailors and the leaders in the center of the Ethelgard's deck. The tropical sun was hot, but a cool breeze kept the air fresh. "We are leaving for a dangerous mission," Elias announced. "But this island cannot be left to chance. From this day forward, we are no longer a crew. We are the Council of the Silver Anchor. We need leaders for every part of our new life." He appointed 5 leaders. Silas would be the warden of the walls, responsible for the physical defense of the archipelago. Sarah would be the keeper of the light, in charge of the archives and the technological development. Martha would be the shadow stalker, leading the scouts and ensuring no one approached the islands unseen. Ben would be the master of the harvest, tasked with using the king's seeds to create a sustainable food supply. Thomas would be the voice of the people, acting as a mediator for the sailors and ensuring everyone's needs were met. "And you, Elias?" Thomas asked. "What is your role?" "I am the captain of the Horizon," Elias said. "My job is to look outward, to face the threats before they reach our home. But the Council has the power. If I do not return, the 5 of you must decide the fate of this place together." The sailors cheered, but it was a sober sound. They knew the stakes. Elias spent the afternoon working with Silas to set up a series of signal fires on the outer cliffs. If Martha's scouts saw a ship, the fires would be lit in a specific sequence to warn the colony to hide. "You're a good man, Elias," Silas said as they looked out over the ocean. Most pirates would have just taken the gold and run for the Mediterranean. You're trying to build something that lasts. "I'm tired of running, Silas," Elias admitted. "I want to walk down a street one day and not have to look over my shoulder." "St. Jude won't be easy," Silas warned. "Admiral Graves is a butcher. He served in the Indies. He doesn't take prisoners." "Neither do I," Elias said, his voice hardening. He went to his cabin and took the golden anchor. He placed it in a special reinforced chest. He wasn't taking it to St. Jude. It was too valuable. He was leaving it with Sarah. He took only the silver ring. It was the key, the catalyst, and his only advantage. As the iron whale prepared to depart, the lagoon felt quiet. The other ships of the king's fleet sat like silent sentinels in the water. Elias stood at the wheel, Commander Vane standing at the prow, looking out toward the north. "The wind is with us," Vane said. "It's the last time we'll need it." Elias replied. He gave the signal, and the iron whale moved out of the lagoon, leaving the sanctuary behind. They were heading into the heart of the storm, toward a battle that would decide if their new world would be born in peace or baptized in fire. The voyage to St. Jude was a descent into the mouth of the lion. The iron whale moved with a predatory grace, its black hull nearly invisible against the churning slate-gray waves of the open Atlantic. In the cramped belly of the ship, Commander Vane worked with Sarah to recalibrate the silver ring's resonance. St. Jude was not a typical tropical island. It was a volcanic spire, a jagged tooth of basalt rising abruptly from the deep. The Royal Navy had carved a fortress directly into the rock, creating a harbor that was shielded from both storms and prying eyes. As the iron whale approached, Elias stood at the periscope, his eyes fixed on the massive stone battlements. "There are 4 frigates in the outer bay," Elias whispered, his voice tight. "And those shore batteries, they're 64-pounders. One hit and we're scrap metal." "We aren't going through the bay, Captain," Vane reminded him. She pointed to a detailed charcoal sketch of the island's underside. "The volcano has underwater lava tubes. My submersible can navigate them, and if we tether the iron whale correctly, we can pull your ship into the flooded grotto directly beneath the laboratory." The transition was terrifying. The ship groaned as it submerged, the pressure of the deep ocean pressing against the iron plates. Silas stood by the main ballast valves, his muscles straining as he manually adjusted the flow. The light faded from blue to a suffocating black, illuminated only by the faint, rhythmic pulse of the silver ring. "Steady," Elias commanded. "If we hit the tube walls, the vibration will alert their sonar buoys." The tunnel was narrow, the walls slick with ancient glass. Suddenly, the ship broke the surface inside a cavernous, man-made grotto. Above them, a massive iron grate served as the floor for Admiral Graves' secret workshop. They could hear the hiss of steam and the rhythmic clanging of hammers. They were inside the heart of the enemy. Elias, Martha, and Vane climbed the emergency ladder, their boots making no sound on the rusted rungs. They emerged into a forest of brass pipes and hissing valves. The laboratory was a marvel of misplaced genius. Rows of captured scholars were working under the watchful eyes of red-coated guards, trying to stabilize a massive, experimental engine that looked like a brass lung. "That's the prototype," Vane whispered, gesturing to the machine. "It's drawing power from a raw shard of mirror crystal, but it's unstable. Look at the pressure gauges." The needles were vibrating in the red zone. The air tasted like copper and burnt ozone. In the center of the room, a man with a chest full of medals and a face like cold flint stood over a drafting table. This was Admiral Graves. He wasn't just a soldier, he was an obsessed man, his eyes fixed on a glowing violet core. "Increase the output," Graves commanded, his voice a sharp blade. "But Admiral, the containment field is failing," a scientist cried out. "Without the catalyst, the crystal will shatter the mountain." "Then let it shatter," Graves replied coldly. "I will have the speed of the gods, or I will have a tomb worthy of my name. Proceed." Elias looked at Martha. They couldn't just blow the room. The scholars were innocent. They needed a distraction. Elias reached into his pocket and touched the silver ring. He knew that the ring acted as a magnet for the crystal's energy. If he could get close enough, he could bleed the power away from the engine, causing a controlled shutdown. "I'll draw the Admiral's attention," Elias whispered. "Martha, get the scholars to the grotto. Vane, prep the explosives for the main boilers. We have 5 minutes." Elias stepped out from behind a massive steam turbine, his sword drawn but held low. "Admiral Graves, your engine is a corpse. You're trying to build a titan out of scrap." The guards instantly leveled their rifles, but Graves raised a hand, stopping them. He turned slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his thin lips. "Captain Elias, the thief of Port Royal. I wondered when the scent of progress would bring you out of your hole." "I'm not here for progress, Graves. I'm here to stop a madman from burning the ocean." Graves laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You talk of burning. You, who hides a king's fleet in a lagoon. I don't want your gold, boy. I want the ring. Give it to me, and I'll let your little colony live in peace as a footnote in my empire." Elias stepped closer, the silver ring on his finger beginning to glow with a fierce, violet intensity. The prototype engine groaned in response, the violet light from its core reaching out like hungry fingers toward Elias. The air began to hum with a frequency that made Elias's teeth ache. "The ring doesn't serve empires, Admiral. It serves the horizon." Suddenly, the engine flared. A bolt of raw energy arched from the machine, striking the floor between them. In the confusion, Martha moved like a wraith, knocking out guards and ushering the panicked scholars toward the secret ladder. Graves pulled a small, high-velocity pistol from his coat, but before he could fire, the floor buckled. The mirror crystal in the engine was reacting to the proximity of the ring. It wasn't shutting down, it was reaching out to join its partner. The laboratory began to vibrate with a violent, rhythmic pulse. Elias realized too late that the bleeding of power was actually an invitation. The mountain wasn't just shaking, it was beginning to wake up. "The core is critical," Vane shouted over the roar of escaping steam. She had finished setting the charges on the secondary boilers, but the main engine was now a sun-bright sphere of violet fire. "Elias, get out of there. The whole level is going to vent." Graves, driven by madness, lunged at Elias, trying to grab the ring from his hand. They struggled on the shaking floor, the heat from the engine blistering the paint on the walls. Graves was surprisingly strong, his hands like iron clamps around Elias's wrist. "It's mine," Graves screamed. "It's the key to the world." Elias saw the pressure gauge on the main boiler explode. He knew they had seconds. He slammed his forehead into Graves' nose, breaking it, and used the moment of shock to kick the Admiral back toward the engine. Graves fell against the containment glass, which was already spider-webbed with cracks. "Silas! Submerge now!" Elias yelled into his radio. He turned and dove for the grotto ladder just as the first charge went off. The secondary boilers erupted in a wall of orange flame, but the real destruction was the mirror crystal. Without the ring to stabilize it, the crystal turned its energy inward. A pulse of violet light expanded from the center of the room, vaporizing the brass lung and the stone walls alike. Elias tumbled into the water of the grotto just as the ceiling collapsed. The iron whale was already moving, its engines roaring as Silas pushed the ship toward the exit tunnel. Martha and Vane pulled Elias into the airlock, slamming the heavy door shut as a shockwave of boiling water hit the ship's hull. The iron whale limped away from St. Jude, the underwater shockwaves tossing the ship like a toy. When they finally surfaced miles away, they looked back to see the volcanic island shrouded in a massive plume of white steam and black smoke. The fortress was gone, and the secret naval base was a graveyard of twisted metal and cooling lava. Elias stood on the deck, his face blackened by soot and his hands shaking. Martha and Vane stood beside him, watching the horizon. They had won, but the victory felt hollow. "We saved the scholars," Martha said softly, gesturing to the group of terrified men and women being tended to by Ben and Thomas. "But Graves, he was just one man. There will be others." "He's right," Vane said, her voice unusually somber. "The Navy will call this an accident. But they'll know. They'll know someone has the catalyst. You've just moved from being a curiosity to being the most wanted man in the world. Elias." Sarah emerged from below deck, holding the silver ring. It was dull now, its energy spent. "We need to go home," she said. "The king's fleet isn't just for hiding anymore. We need to learn how to fight. Really fight." Elias looked at the ring. He had used it to destroy, and he hated the weight of it. But he looked at the scholars, the doctors, the engineers, the teachers they had rescued, and he saw the beginning of the world Alaric had dreamed of. "Set a course for the lagoon," Elias commanded. "We have a foundation to build, and we need to prepare for the great tide. It's coming faster than we thought." As the sun rose over the smoking ruin of St. Jude, the iron whale turned its back on the war and began the long journey back to the sanctuary. The first great battle was over, but the war for the future had only just begun. The journey back to the hidden lagoon was marked by a newfound gravity. The 20 original sailors were now joined by 35 scholars, men and women whose hands were stained with ink and grease rather than salt and blood. The iron whale felt crowded, but the air was electric with a shared purpose. Elias watched from the bridge as the shimmering mist of the sanctuary parted to welcome them home. The sanctuary was no longer just a hiding place. It was becoming a city. As the scholars stepped off the iron whale and onto the mahogany docks Silas had reinforced, they didn't see a pirate den. They saw a laboratory of infinite scale. Dr. Aries Thorne, a leading physicist among the refugees, looked up at the Ethelgard with tears in his eyes. "We thought these theories died with Alaric," Thorne whispered, touching the silver-plated hull of the flagship. "To see them realized, it's like stepping into a future that was stolen from us." Elias stood before the combined group on the beach. "You were prisoners of a man who wanted to turn knowledge into a weapon. Here, you are citizens of the horizon. We have the gold to fund your work and the steel to protect it. But in return, we need you to finish what the king started. We need to be ready for the great tide." The transition was not without friction. The sailors, used to the hierarchy of the sea, had to learn to live alongside intellectuals who spent their nights arguing over thermodynamics and crystal resonance. Ben, the master of the harvest, worked with the botanists to plant the resilient earth seeds, creating a canopy of fast-growing, salt-resistant trees that helped further camouflage the lagoon from aerial observation. By the end of the first week, the first High Council meeting was held in the Great Hall. The scholars brought a sense of order that Elias hadn't realized they lacked. They established a system of education for the younger sailors and began a systematic survey of the island's volcanic vents. The sanctuary was breathing, its heart beating faster with every new mind added to its collective. But the peace was a thin glass skin over a boiling sea. They knew the Royal Navy wouldn't stop at St. Jude. In the depths of the Ethelgard, Sarah and Dr. Thorne sat surrounded by the king's metal-paged books. The central project was the thermal steam engine. Unlike the primitive coal burners of the British Navy, Alaric's design utilized the geothermal heat of the archipelago, focused through mirror crystals, to create a high-pressure, closed-loop system. "The problem isn't the heat," Sarah explained, pointing to a complex diagram. "It's the regulation. Without the silver ring to act as a governor, the pressure builds until the pipes liquefy. We need a physical interface that can translate the ring's resonance into mechanical movement." They spent days sketching the resonance governor. It was a delicate assembly of silver gears and quartz lenses that would sit atop the boiler. The ring would be placed inside a lead-lined housing, its throb dictating the speed of the turbine. "If this works," Thorne said, his voice trembling with excitement, "we won't just have a fast ship. We'll have a ship that can move in any direction, regardless of the wind or tide. We can outmaneuver the entire British fleet in a dead calm." The materials required were rare. They needed pure cobalt for the turbine blades to withstand the heat, and a specific grade of volcanic glass for the insulators. Elias authorized the opening of the king's deep vault, a chamber beneath the lagoon floor that contained the rarest elements Alaric had gathered during his reign. It was a gamble, spending their most precious resources on a single prototype. But they all knew that the iron whale, for all its strength, was a relic of the old world. They needed a herald for the new one. Construction began on a small, sleek hull that had been sitting unfinished in the Ethelgard's auxiliary bay. Silas dubbed it the Phoenix, a name for a ship born from the ashes of the Old Kingdom. The sailors worked alongside the engineers, their calloused hands learning the precision of clockwork. The work was grueling. The heat from the volcanic forge they built near the vents was stifling, and the precision required for the turbine blades meant that many were discarded and reforged. Silas became a man possessed, his hammer ringing against the anvil 20 hours a day. He saw the Phoenix as his masterpiece, the culmination of a lifetime spent at sea. "She's not a boat, Captain," Silas said to Elias as they watched the engine being lowered into the hull. "She's a living thing. You can feel the heat in her ribs. She's hungry to move." The moment of the first cold fire test arrived. The ring was placed into the governor. The scholars held their breath as the first whisks of steam began to circulate through the pipes. The turbine began to hum, a low, melodic sound that resonated with the very rock of the island. It wasn't the violent roar of a navy boiler. It was a steady, rhythmic pulse. Suddenly, the lights in the bay flickered. The Phoenix didn't just vibrate. It seemed to settle into the water with a predatory intent. The silver gears of the governor spun so fast they became a blur. The engine was alive. The first steamship of the Silver Anchor was no longer a blueprint. It was a reality. But as the crew cheered, Elias noticed a dark residue in the steam. The crystals were powerful, but they were also unstable. The living fuel had a cost they hadn't yet calculated. While the Phoenix was being outfitted, Martha's scouts returned with chilling news. The destruction of St. Jude had not deterred the Navy. It had galvanized them. Admiral Graves was dead, but he had been replaced by a man named Commodore Blackwood, a tactician known as the Ghost of the Channel. "He isn't burning islands," Martha reported to the council. "He's listening. He's set up a network of listening posts across the Antilles. They're using large brass ears to catch the sound of our engines. They know we have a ship that sounds like a heartbeat." The psychological weight began to press down on the colony. The joy of the Phoenix was tempered by the realization that their sanctuary was being hunted by a mind as sharp as their own. Elias found himself spending long hours at the edge of the cliffs, looking out at the horizon. Commander Vane joined him one evening, her grey eyes reflecting the fading light. "You're thinking about the great tide," she said. "It wasn't a question. Alaric said it was a fleet of iron and smoke." Elias replied, "But I think it's more than that. It's a shift in the world. The era of the individual sailor is ending. Everything is becoming industrial, cold. Which is why the Phoenix is so important," Vane said, leaning against the rock. "It's industrial, yes, but it's guided by the ring. It's human. Blackwood represents a world where people are just parts of a machine. You represent a world where the machine is a tool for the people. That's why he hates you, Elias. You're a contradiction to his order." Elias looked at the silver ring. He realized that the Great Tide wasn't just a fleet. It was an idea, and the only way to fight an idea was to prove that a better one existed. He turned back to the lagoon, where the lights of the new city were beginning to twinkle. He had to be more than a captain now. He had to be the spark that kept the dark at bay. The day of the Phoenix's maiden voyage arrived with a clear sky and a sharp wind. The entire colony gathered on the docks. The ship was a marvel of design, low-slung, with a hull of treated oak reinforced with cobalt steel plates. It had no masts, only a small, retractable funnel for emergency venting. Elias took the helm. Sarah stood at the governor, her hand hovering over the silver ring. Silas stood in the engine room, his hand on the primary steam valve. "Engage," Elias commanded. The ship didn't lurch, it glided. With a soft hiss, the Phoenix moved out of the bay. In the open water, Elias pushed the throttle forward. The response was instantaneous. The ship surged ahead, cutting through the waves at a speed that made the iron whale look like a drifting log. They were moving at 20 knots against a headwind, a feat that would have been impossible for any other vessel in the world. "It's perfect," Sarah laughed, the wind whipping her hair. "The resonance is stable. The ring is holding the pressure perfectly." They did circles around the outer islands, the ship turning with a grace that defied its weight. But as they pushed further out, the silver ring began to glow a deep, angry red. A low-frequency hum started to vibrate through the hull, a sound that wasn't coming from the engine. "Elias, look at the water," Silas called up from the engine room. Behind the Phoenix, the wake wasn't white foam. It was a shimmering, oily violet. The engine was bleeding energy into the ocean. Suddenly, the horizon to the north darkened. It wasn't a storm. It was smoke. A line of black funnels appeared on the horizon. The Royal Navy hadn't waited for the great tide. They were already here, and they had found the Phoenix by the trail of light it left in its wake. "The hunt is over," Elias said, his grip tightening on the wheel. "The war has begun." The horizon was no longer a line of hope. It was a wall of soot and iron. Commodore Blackwood's fleet did not approach with the grace of traditional sail. They came with the rhythmic, mechanical thud of massive pistons and the thick, black breath of coal-fired furnaces. The Phoenix sat low in the water, its violet wake a glowing neon sign in the darkening sea. Elias gripped the wheel of the Phoenix, his knuckles white. To his left, Sarah was frantically adjusting the resonance governor, her hands blurring as she turned silver dials. The red glow of the silver ring was pulsing in sync with the distant thud of the British engines. It was as if the two technologies were screaming at each other across the waves. "Range, 4,000 yards. Martha shouted from the small observation hatch. "They're turning broadside. Elias. They aren't waiting for a parley." The lead ship, a towering wall of oak and iron plating called the Leviathan, erupted in a line of orange fire. The sea around the Phoenix turned into a graveyard of water geysers as heavy shells plummeted into the deep. The shockwaves rocked the small vessel, sending tools and loose parts skittering across the deck. "Silas, give me everything," Elias roared into the speaking tube. "The pressure is at the limit." "Captain." Silas's voice came back, strained and metallic. "If I open the main vent, we'll either fly or explode." "Then let's fly." Elias slammed the throttle forward. The Phoenix didn't just accelerate, it leaped. The violet energy in the wake flared into a blinding brilliance, and the ship tore through the water at nearly 30 knots. The British gunners, used to lead-timing slow-moving frigates, missed wildly. Their shells fell hundreds of yards behind. "The wake!" Sarah cried, pointing behind them. The oily violet residue was beginning to solidify on the surface of the ocean, creating a path of crystalline frost that sparkled in the moonlight. "The engine is reacting to the salt. We're leaving a literal road for them to follow." Elias pulled a sharp turn, the Phoenix leaning so far that the rail dipped into the foam. He headed for a field of jagged rocks known as the Devil's Teeth. He knew the Leviathan was too deep and too slow to follow. But as he looked back, he saw a smaller, sleeker shape detaching from the Navy line. It was a steam sloop, fast and nimble, and it was gaining ground. The era of the lone pirate was over. The era of the machine war had begun. By the time the Phoenix limped back through the shimmering mist of the sanctuary, the lagoon was no longer a place of peace. It was an armed camp. Silas had been busy during the Phoenix's maiden voyage. Heavy brass cannons, salvaged from the King's ancient fleet and reinforced with cobalt steel, were now mounted on the high cliffs overlooking the entrance. "They are coming. Silas." Elias said as he stepped off the scorched deck of the Phoenix. The ship's hull was hot to the touch, the glass-like rock of the island singing in response to the engine's heat. "I know, Captain," Silas replied, his face grim. "Martha's scouts saw the smoke from the cliffs. We have 3 hours, maybe 4, before the tide brings them to the gate." Sarah was already at the golden anchor, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She was trying to interface the anchor with the island's volcanic vents. "If we can't hide the island, we have to make it untouchable," she explained. "I'm trying to create a localized magnetic storm using the anchor's resonance. It will scramble their compasses and, hopefully, jam their firing pins." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first of Blackwood's ships appeared on the edge of the mist. They didn't try to enter the narrow gap. Instead, they formed a semicircle, effectively blockading the archipelago. From the deck of the Leviathan, a massive signal light began to blink in a cold, rhythmic code. "Surrender the anchor and the ring." The message read, "Or we will level the islands. You have until dawn." Elias looked at his people. He saw the scholars, the sailors, and the refugees. They had built a home out of shadows and secrets, and now the light of the old world was threatening to burn it down. He touched the silver ring. It was cool now, but it felt alive, like a heartbeat on his finger. "We don't surrender," Elias said, his voice carrying through the quiet lagoon. "We've spent our lives being told what the horizon belongs to. Tonight, we show them that the horizon belongs to the ones who are brave enough to sail toward it." The plan was a suicide mission, but it was the only way to break the blockade. While the Navy expected a frontal assault or a desperate flight, Elias, Martha, and Commander Vane slipped into the water using Vane's clockwork submersible. Their target, the Leviathan. The underwater world was silent, save for the rhythmic thrum of the British propellers. The submersible moved like a dark shadow, tethered to a crate of unstable mirror crystals Sarah had modified to act as a resonance bomb. "If we hit the main boiler room, the steam will do the rest," Vane whispered, her hands steady on the controls. They surfaced in the shadow of the Leviathan's massive iron hull. The smell of coal smoke was suffocating, and the sound of the Navy sailors shouting orders above them was constant. Martha led the way, using a grappling hook to climb a silent venting pipe. They moved through the ship like ghosts, their boots muffled by the roar of the engines. In the heart of the ship, they found the cold iron engine. It was a monstrosity of black steel and hissing steam, a brute force imitation of Alaric's elegant designs. Elias felt a wave of revulsion. This was what the world would become if Blackwood won. Everything reduced to smoke, soot, and labor. "Plant the charges," Elias commanded. As Martha set the crystals near the primary pressure vessels, a light flickered at the end of the corridor. Commodore Blackwood himself stepped into the engine room, flanked by 6 Marines. He wasn't a man of madness like Graves. He was a man of cold, calculated logic. "Captain Elias," Blackwood said, his voice calm over the hiss of steam. "You are a fascinating variable. But even a variable must be resolved. The ring, if you please. I would prefer not to get blood on the machinery." Elias stood his ground, the silver ring beginning to glow violet in the dim light of the engine room. "You can have the ring, Commodore. But it only works with a heart that understands the sea. All you understand is the coal." "I understand power," Blackwood replied. He raised his hand to signal the Marines, but at that moment, the golden anchor back at the lagoon was activated. A massive pulse of energy traveled through the water, hitting the Leviathan like a physical blow. The silver ring flared, and the resonance bomb Martha had planted began to sing. The explosion was not a burst of fire, but a wave of violet light that tore through the Leviathan's engine room. The cold iron didn't just break, it shattered, the pressure vessel's venting steam that glowed with a ghostly luminescence. Elias and his team dove into the emergency hatch as the ship groaned, its iron plates buckling under the supernatural strain. Back at the lagoon, Sarah had pushed the golden anchor to its zenith. The atmospheric pressure dropped instantly, and the shimmering mist around the islands transformed into a massive, rotating storm. This wasn't a natural hurricane. It was a wall of violet lightning and magnetic interference. The Navy fleet was caught in the mirror storm. Their compasses spun wildly, and the iron plating of their ships began to glow with static electricity. The Leviathan, crippled by the sabotage, began to list to the side, its massive funnels collapsing into the sea. "It's working!" Silas shouted from the cliffs, his cannons firing into the confusion. The violet lightning struck the water, creating pillars of steam that blinded the British gunners. The Phoenix, led now by Ben and Thomas, darted in and out of the storm, its high-speed maneuvers making it impossible to hit. It was a battle of the future against the past, and for the first time, the past was losing. In the center of the storm, Elias surfaced the submersible. He looked back at the Leviathan. Blackwood was standing on the sinking deck, his face illuminated by the violet flashes. He didn't look angry. He looked defeated by a logic he couldn't calculate. The great tide had arrived, but it wasn't the fleet of iron he had expected. It was a tide of light. "We have to go," Vane shouted, pulling Elias back into the hatch. "The anchor is going to collapse the field. If we're caught in the feedback, we'll be vaporized." They dove deep, the submersible vibrating with the raw power of the closing portal. The ocean behind them became a white-hot void for a single, blinding second, and then silence. When the sun rose the next morning, the mist was gone. The Royal Navy fleet had vanished, driven back to the north or scattered across the sea. The Leviathan was a dark skeleton on the horizon, slowly being claimed by the deep. The sanctuary was quiet. The golden anchor sat on its pedestal, its white light now a soft, pulsing glow. Sarah sat beside it, exhausted but smiling. They had survived. But more importantly, they had proven that the legacy was more than just gold. It was the power to protect a different way of life. Elias stood on the beach, looking out at the open water. The silver ring on his finger was a part of him now, a symbol of the responsibility he carried. He turned to see his council. Silas, Sarah, Martha, Ben, and Thomas, standing together. Behind them, the scholars and sailors were already beginning the work of rebuilding. "They'll come back," Vane said, walking up to him. She had decided to stay. The Navy had no place for a commander who had seen the light. Maybe not next month, or even next year, but the world won't forget what happened here. "Let them come," Elias said. "We aren't just a hidden lagoon anymore. We are a beacon." He looked at the Phoenix, docked once again beside the Iron Whale. The two ships represented the journey, the strength of the old and the speed of the new. The great tide had passed, and in its wake, a new world was being built. "Captain," Thomas asked, "what's our first order for the new era?" Elias looked at the horizon, the blue water stretching out forever, full of secrets yet to be found. He felt the weight of the ring and the warmth of the sun. He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that he hadn't worn since Port Royal. "The First Order," Elias said, his voice clear and full of hope. "We sail. We have a whole world to show what a pirate and a scholar can do when they share the same dream." As the Phoenix moved out of the lagoon, its wake was no longer an oily violet. It was a clear, sparkling white, merging perfectly with the sea. The legend of the silver anchor was no longer a story of treasure. It was a story of the horizon, and for the first time in history, the horizon was wide open.